Chapter 803. Sensing this change, Luo Fan could not help but be amazed. He knew that the power of Tao Master Hercules was even more amazing than he had imagined, but this made him even more happy. First written novel, fastest updated novel on the internet. After all, Tao Master Hercules' inheritance information body was in Luo Fan's mind. Even if he could not lock onto its existence, he could still lock onto a certain range. Therefore, even if Tao Master Hercules had a mysterious power that made it impossible for him to lock onto it, he still did not stop bombarding it with his mind. Instead, he covered Tao Master Hercules' location with his mind and blasted it towards him. There was almost no time gap. Luo Fan's mind directly bombarded Tao Master Hercules' inheritance information body. Of course, it was difficult for Luo Fan to lock onto its existence after all. Therefore, compared to the attacks that the other Tao sovereigns' inherited information bodies had suffered, the degree of concentration and condensation were much worse. However, because the strength of the mind bombarded by Luo Fan was not the same, the will encountered by Tao Master Hercules' inheritance information body was not any weaker than the other Tao Master's inheritance information bodies. The moment the will bombarded Tao Master Hercules' inheritance information body, Tao Master Hercules' inheritance information body, which looked like a 5 or 6-year-old child, naturally trembled. With the power of this vibration, Luo Fan's will, which was enough to destroy a medium-sized world, was instantly shattered. All of the will turned into powder and scattered in all directions. Moreover, there was even a wave of power that was transmitted along with his thoughts, wanting to shatter Luo Fan's divine soul. Fortunately, Luo Fan's reaction was extremely fast. With a thought, he cut off the connection between his spirit and the will. The vibrating power gradually collapsed and dissipated when it could not find a target. In the end, it disappeared. I almost failed miserably. Luo Fan showed a faint wry smile on his face. Although the great strength Tao Master's inheritance was just a collection of information, because the information contained in it was extremely mysterious, when it was gathered together, it would naturally possess all kinds of incredible power. If the vibrating force that could completely shatter Luo Fan's power into powder were to be transmitted to his divine soul, it might not cause fatal damage to his divine soul, but it would definitely not be damaged in the slightest. Luo Fan did not hesitate after he finished probing the information body of the many Tao Masters' inheritances. With a slight thought, he touched the faint existence in the depths of his heart. It was a mysterious connection that could not be described in words. In an instant, a vast and majestic will appeared in Luo Fan's senses in the untainted land that was separated by an unknown amount of space. That was the will of the body. The moment the Avatar sensed this will, the Avatar in the great Tianyuan world instantly knew that it had been more than 100,000 years since he last contacted the untainted land. He knew that the flow of time between the two worlds was completely different. Without hesitation, he immediately wrapped a thought around the 5 Tao Masters' inheritance information bodies and sent them along the mysterious connection in the depths of his heart. Each of these inheritance information bodies contained endless information, but after being refined by Luo Fan, they were like the simplest thoughts. The 5 information bodies followed Luo Fan's thoughts and instantly traveled a great distance. They directly arrived in the untainted land and were completely received by Luo Fan's body. At this moment, as Luo Fan's branch had expected, 180,000 years had passed since the Avatar last contacted him. At this moment, Luo Fan was still sitting cross-legged at the entrance of the passageway. The passageway was still sealed, and the human master was still sealed in the bracelet that sealed the passageway. The moment the Avatar transmitted the information body of the 5 Tao Masters' inheritance and a will entered his mind, Luo Fan's expression changed greatly. A mixture of joy and worry instantly appeared on his face, which had not changed for many years. The Annihilation Realm, the Void Enlightenment Realm, the Integration Realm, the Transcendence Realm, and the Tao Master. The great Tianyuan world is indeed much more advanced than the untainted world. No wonder it has developed the cultivation civilization to almost the limit. It actually divided these 5 realms above the peak of the zenith heaven realm. As he thought of this, he could not help but exclaim in admiration. The thought transmitted by his clone in the great Tianyuan world had already told him everything that had happened to him over the past few years, no matter how big or small, in great detail. Although it was only a thought. But for an existence at the peak of the disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven, the amount of information contained in a thought was almost beyond imagination. If it was written down, even millions of words might not be able to completely cover it. How difficult would it be to talk about thousands of years of experience? Because the thought contained a lot of information, the body in the untainted world instantly knew all kinds of experiences of the Avatar, and also obtained many ideas that the Avatar had obtained. A lot of information, and the ideas about the world were naturally obtained by him. In fact, although the division of the 5 realms shocked Luo Fan greatly, although it made him feel that it was an eye-opener, and he felt that his path forward was a little clearer, it was far less than the Avatar's understanding of the world. After all, the division of the 5 realms was just a division of the realms above the 9th stage of the celestial realm in the great Tianyuan world. Perhaps it had a great role of inspiration for any cultivator, but it was more likely to be limited to the great Tianyuan world. For the body of Luo Fan in the untainted world, it was not necessarily applicable. The significance of these 5 realms for the body of Luo Fan was more to show that there were still some realms above the peak of the zenith heaven golden path, and to show him which direction he should go. But the Avatar's understanding of the world was not like this. Although he did not obtain confirmation, as soon as he sensed the Avatar's understanding of the world, he instantly had a wonderful feeling that this kind of understanding might be the key to achieving the fruit of the origin. This was also something that he had never thought of. Even in the mortal life of his previous life, he had never seen it in any legend. Although there was no evidence, as long as this feeling appeared, then the Avatar's understanding of the world was greater than any other gain, more important and worthy of his attention. In that instant, he impatiently sent his thoughts into Tao Venerate Great Strength's information body. In an instant, endless information flowed into his mind along with that thought. The inherited information body of Lord Dali did not collapse, but the endless information contained in it was constantly sensed by Luo Fan. Luo Fan carefully comprehended this information, comprehended the numerous cultivation methods, and worked hard to cultivate the true meaning of cultivation and the world view contained in the cultivation methods. Luo Fan's body was not the same as the Avatar far away in the great Tianyuan world. Although the two had the same will, the same thoughts, the same mentality, but their cultivation realms were not the same. The Avatar in the great Tianyuan world had worked hard for so long, but it was only at the peak of the disbanded celestial of the great all-embracing heaven. It was not even at the disbanded path of the great all-embracing heaven. Although Luo Fan's body had not broken through in the past hundreds of thousands of years, it was also at the peak of the true path of the great all-embracing heaven. In this realm, if placed in the great Tianyuan world, the power of his divine ability could even compare to an existence that surpassed the 9th rank of the immortal realm, although it might not be comparable to an existence of the annihilation realm. With this difference, it could be said that Luo Fan's body was tens of thousands of times stronger than the Avatar. It was even to the point that the Avatar could easily crush the Avatar with a single finger. Such a difference in cultivation realms made it so that even if they had the same thoughts, the same memories, the same accumulation, but what one comprehended, sensed, and could see was a world of difference. This kind of comprehension, perception, and seeing, this naturally included the inheritance of Tao Master Hercules that was constantly pouring into his mind at this moment. In an instant, Luo Fan discovered countless things that the Avatar had not discovered. His understanding of Lord Dali's inheritance quickly surpassed that of the Avatar far away in the great Tianyuan world. He even took out the world view of Lord Dali at a speed that was thousands of times faster than the Avatar. I didn't expect it to be like this. This Lord Dali is probably like the Avatar of the will of the Earth universe, a force that gave birth to spiritual wisdom and cultivated. After refining this worldview, Luo Fan could not help but be amazed. This Lord Dali's worldview was so perfect that it was the first time Luo Fan had seen it in countless years of cultivation. If he just looked at the worldview, he could not even find a trace of awkwardness or omission. Almost everything he had seen, heard, and felt, even the fact that he had transmigrated, it could all be explained in Lord Dali's worldview. The entire world, the entire universe, the entire chaotic state seemed to be built and evolved from Lord Dali's worldview. Even with a slight deduction based on that worldview, Luo Fan could even deduce thousands of methods that had the same effect as the various methods he had created before, but were completely different in nature. If such a worldview was placed on Earth in his previous life, it could already be regarded as the truth. However, after all, Luo Fan's Taoist heart was firm. The facts that he had determined in the past could not be so easily reversed. Even if this worldview was so perfect, so mysterious, he would not easily believe that it was the truth. From understanding the inheritance information of Lord Dali to completely taking out his worldview, it took Luo Fan less than a year to completely understand the true cultivation meaning of Lord Dali. Compared to the 2,000 years it took for his avatar to only understand the cultivation method of Lord Dali of 5 elements, it was more than 2,000 or 3,000 times faster. The reason for such a difference was naturally due to the huge difference in the cultivation realm between the main body and the avatar. After understanding the inheritance of Lord Dali, Luo Fan turned around and began to invade the inheritance information body of Lord Dali of Darkness with his thoughts. Similarly, the inheritance information body of Lord Dali of Darkness did not collapse, but there was endless information constantly flowing into Luo Fan's mind through his thoughts. This allowed him to easily receive the inheritance of Lord Dali of Darkness. The reason why he chose the inheritance of Lord Dali of Darkness as the second kind of inheritance was naturally because in the Avatar's eyes, the inheritance of Lord Dali of Darkness was second only to the inheritance of Lord Dali. Luo Fan had only spent less than a year to extract the true meaning and worldview of cultivation from Tao Master Vigor's inheritance. Tao Master Darkness' inheritance was not as complicated as Tao Master Vigor's inheritance, so the time it took to extract it was not much longer than Tao Master Vigor's. Therefore, in less than a year, the worldview and true cultivation meaning of Lord Dali of Tao appeared in Luo Fan's mind. The worldview that the Avatar admired was also not inferior to Lord Dali's worldview. The entire worldview was also unimaginably perfect. It could also explain everything that Luo Fan had encountered, thought, and seen. It could also explain the process of Luo Fan's transmigration. Such a worldview was also qualified to be called the truth in the mortal world. Putting the worldview of Lord Dali of Tao and Lord Dali of Darkness side by side, it seemed like they had completely different views of the same fact, but both could be explained. There were countless reasons, and even countless other explanations could be deduced. Luo Fan suddenly felt like he had comprehended something. However, this feeling passed in a flash. It quickly disappeared without a trace, making him unable to grasp it. Although Luo Fan felt it was a pity that this feeling disappeared, he did not take it to heart. This was because he knew that no matter how important this feeling was, since he could not grasp it at this time, it meant that he had not accumulated enough. This meant that he still needed to continue to work hard to accumulate knowledge before he could finally grasp it. Understanding this, he stopped comparing the two worldviews and began to think about the inheritance information body of Lord Dali of 5 element. The inheritance information body of Lord Dali of 5 element was the most special among the inheritance of the 6 great Tao Masters that Luo Fan had obtained. This was because the inheritance treasure of Lord Dali of 5 Element had not accepted any living creature to accept the inheritance for billions of years. Compared to the other Tao Masters who could obtain some impartation at will, it was almost the polar opposite. Even Luo Fan's doppelganger did not understand the reason for this. In this case, when it was difficult for Luo Fan to decide which inheritance was better, naturally, he would choose the inheritance of Lord Dali of 5 Element first. Compared to the inheritance of Lord Dali of Darkness and Lord Dali, the inheritance of Lord Dali of 5 Element was inferior in terms of grandeur. Moreover, more importantly, Luo Fan's doppelganger had already comprehended the inheritance of Lord Dali of 5 Element. Although it was limited to the internal method, it was enough to greatly shorten the time for Luo Fan to comprehend the inheritance. Therefore, it only took less than half a year for Luo Fan to comprehend the inheritance of Lord Dali of 5 Element and refine the gist of truth contained in the countless cultivation methods and the root world view of Lord Dali of 5 Element. When this was done, Luo Fan could not help but frown slightly. At first glance, the world view of Lord Dali of 5 Element seemed to be no different from that of Tao Master Aurora Polaris, Tao Master Light, or the current Tao Master. It seemed to be worse than the world view of Lord Dali of Darkness and Lord Dali. However, Luo Fan vaguely felt that there seemed to be an unfinished meaning in it. Although this world view was also complete and perfect, it also explained all the facts and was qualified to be called the truth. But he felt that there was something hidden in this worldview. It was as if there was something hidden in this worldview that he hadn't noticed yet, something that was hidden in the depths of the world. It seemed that this worldview was not so simple, but there was something deeper and more complicated in it. What the hell is going on? Is the inheritance of Lord Dali of 5 Element not complete? Luo Fan frowned and thought to himself, but that's not right. Whether it's the inner sky method or the outer sky method, it's already extremely complete. A little more would be superfluous and a little less would be imperfect. It should already be complete, he thought to himself, but no matter how he thought about it, he could not figure out what the secret was. After a long time, he could not find any clues, so he could only put this problem aside. However, he had an understanding in his heart. Perhaps after solving this problem, he would know why Lord Dali of 5 Elements' inheritance treasure had not found an inheritor for billions of years. Putting aside the inheritance information body of Lord Dali of 5 Element, Luo Fan began to invade the inheritance information body of the current Tao Master with his mind to accept the inheritance of the current Tao Master. As for comparing and analyzing the world views of Lord Dali of 5 Element, Tao Master Vigor, and Tao Master Darkness, he did not intend to do so immediately. He planned to extract the world views of the 6 Tao Masters before doing so. He had not been able to grasp the mysterious feeling before because he had not accumulated enough. In this case, if he accumulated enough to comprehend the feeling, he would naturally be more likely to grasp the feeling. Therefore, the comparison of 3 worldviews was naturally not as good as the comparison of 6 worldviews. Next was the inheritance information of the current Tao Master. Because there was a lot of information and there was no previous understanding of the avatar in it, it took Luo Fan nearly a year to extract the cultivation true meaning and worldview. The current Tao Master's worldview was also extremely perfect. It could perfectly explain everything and could be called the truth. However, just as the Avatar felt, this worldview did not reach the root of the chaotic state. It was a little worse than the inheritance of Tao Master Darkness and Tao Master Vigor. Putting this worldview aside, Luo Fan began to comprehend the inheritance of Tao Master Light. This kind of inheritance also took Luo Fan nearly a year to extract the true meaning of cultivation and worldview. There was nothing special about Tao Master Light's worldview. Although it was different from the current Tao Master's worldview, it was on the same level. It was not as grand as the worldview of Tao Master Vigor and Tao Master Darkness. Moreover, it was not as endless as the world view of Lord Dolly of Five Element. After that, it took Luo Fan nearly a year to extract the cultivation true meaning and worldview from the inheritance of Tao Master Aurora. It took Luo Fan nearly 5.5 years to comprehend the inheritance of the 6 Tao Masters. It was not even as long as the time it took for the avatar of the Tianyuan Great World to condense the inheritance of the 6 Tao Masters into the 6 inheritance information bodies. To be continued. Chapter 804. After taking out the last worldview of Tao Master Aurora Polaris, Luo Fan put the worldviews of the 6 great Tao Masters together and carefully comprehended the differences of these 6 worldviews. First written release, fastest updated novel on the internet. Each of these 6 worldviews was perfect, and complete. Each of them was like the truth. They could almost explain all the events that Luo Fan had encountered in the past trillions of years. They could even reconstruct the infinite methods that Luo Fan had created with the help of Pangu's original spirit. They could even deduce them and create a more profound and mysterious realm. If there was only one worldview, it might break up Luo Fan's worldview and make Luo Fan believe in this worldview. However, when these 6 worldviews appeared together, they constantly reminded Luo Fan that these worldviews were not the truth. These worldviews were not unique. There were still some differences between a single worldview and the real facts and the real truth. In this case, it became easier for Luo Fan to understand these worldviews and realize the differences between them. He randomly grabbed a fact that existed in the world and put it in these 6 incomparably complete worldviews. He then used these worldviews to explain and deduce. The whole process was unimaginably complicated. Each of these 6 worldviews was formed by a Tao Master's accumulation and improvement over countless years. For the same fact, each worldview could naturally perfectly explain it and even deduce more complicated facts. However, the process of explaining this fact was different for every worldview, and there were even many contradictions between them. However, the final result was not wrong. Furthermore, the facts that were deduced were all completely correct, facts that could withstand countless experiments. This change was so mysterious that it was almost strange. Sensing the role of these worldviews in explaining the same fact, the mysterious feeling that Luo Fan had when the 2 worldviews were juxtaposed appeared again. Moreover, that feeling did not disappear in a flash this time. Instead, it had always existed, always lingering in his mind, allowing him to comprehend it, allowing him to grasp it. Luo Fan could grasp the fleeting feeling most of the time. This has always been there. How could Luo Fan not grasp the feeling that had been lingering in his mind? Therefore, in an instant, Luo Fan understood what this feeling was. So that's how it is. These 6 worldviews are all correct. Only some variation of the truth, only some aspect of the truth. Behind them, the true worldview, the true truth, is still hidden high above. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Understanding this, he suddenly felt that the 6 worldviews in front of him seemed to have some kind of inexplicable connection. However, this connection was so obscure that it was unimaginable. With Luo Fan's current level of cultivation, he could only faintly feel its existence. But he couldn't tell what these connections were, nor could he grasp anything from them. However, this was not important. For Luo Fan at this time, the connection between these 6 worldviews did not mean anything to him. At this moment, he had not even completely sorted out his own worldview. Even if he understood the connection between these 6 worldviews, what could he do? Putting the 6 worldviews aside, Luo Fan gradually opened his eyes. His eyes possessed incredible power. In an instant, he saw through the layers of space-time barriers and illuminated most of the primordial world. An inexplicable smile gradually appeared on his face. This smile contained the joy of grasping the truth in the fog, the anxiety of not knowing the end of the road, and an indescribable confidence. Worldview is indeed the key to becoming a saint. Fortunately, I sent my clone to the Tianyuan world. Otherwise, I'm afraid I would still be on the wrong path without knowing it. At this moment, there was only such a thought in Luo Fan's mind. The reason why he had such a thought. It was because he had extended the feeling in his heart previously and understood the true appearance of the primordial world and all the other perfect worlds. In fact, the infinite perfect worlds in the primordial world were created by powerful chaotic creatures according to their own worldviews. The reason why these worlds were different, the reason why the laws and even the great Tao were different, was that the chaotic creatures had different worldviews. For example, the primordial world was created by Pangu in the primordial world according to his own worldview. The supreme great Tao of the primordial world, including all the laws, and even the construction of time and space, were in line with Pangu's worldview. The reason why every perfect world was so perfect that it could produce saints, immortal and indestructible creatures, and even exist in the primordial world almost forever, was not because every chaotic creature's worldview was so perfect. On the contrary, only when the chaotic creature's worldview was almost perfect could these worlds survive. If the worldview of the chaos creature that created the world wasn't perfect enough or there was any mistake, the world that he created would be destroyed soon. Instead of remaining in the world, it would be impossible for it to exist in the endless state of chaos. That was why all the perfect worlds in the boundless primordial world were so perfect that they could bear the existence of immortal and indestructible saints. After understanding the truth, Luo Fan suddenly felt that the suppression of the supreme great Tao of the primordial world on him had completely disappeared in an instant. In an instant, he felt refreshed both physically and mentally, and an unprecedented sense of joy lingered in his mind. This joy was so touching that a smile bloomed on his face involuntarily. Perhaps, after sorting out my worldview, I have to deduce the great Tao of Tao fruit again and completely change it. Only then can I really rely on it to achieve the mixed essence Tao fruit. In that joy, Luo Fan thought so. It was necessary to deduce the great Tao of Tao fruit again. The great Tao of Tao fruit was mysterious, and it was even the most mysterious method that Luo Fan had seen since he went to the great Tianyuan world, apart from the inheritance of the 6 great Tao masters. In other words, it was a cultivation method that was not much inferior to the inheritance of the 6 Tao masters. However, its foundation was the cultivation method that Luo Fan had created by visualizing the Buzhou mountain of the primordial world and then using the Pangu primordial spirit. No matter how mysterious this cultivation method was, its foundation was also based on Pangu's worldview. It was the supreme great Tao of the primordial world, and it was the way the primordial world was formed. Such a foundation determined that if one wanted to truly rely on such a cultivation method to achieve the primordial Tao fruit and achieve indestructible and eternal status, they could only completely believe in Pangu's worldview. From the bottom of his heart, he believed that the structure of the primordial world was the existence of truth. Obviously, only those who were extremely naive or even thoughtless could completely believe in the worldview of others. Even if that person was the supreme Pangu, it was the same. Other than people who were so simple that they almost had no thoughts, as long as they had logical thinking, they would definitely have such doubts. As long as they knew how to think, they would definitely have such doubts. They would definitely feel that certain facts in the world were difficult to understand. Even if there was countless evidence to prove that that was the case, it would definitely not be able to dispel the seed of doubt that existed in the deepest part of his heart. This seed of doubt was naturally nothing in normal times. It would not affect ordinary cultivators. However, if it was placed on a cultivator who wanted to prove the primordial Tao fruit and achieve indestructible and eternal status, it would be fatal. If he had doubts about the foundation of his cultivation, how could he cultivate it to the limit? How could he transcend the world and time and space? Luo Fan was clearly not an extremely simple or thoughtless existence. He grew up in the Earth universe. When he transmigrated to the Great Wasteland, he had already established his own complete worldview. Although this worldview had almost been completely replaced by a new worldview after countless years of polishing, the deepest point of view still remained. Therefore, even though the primordial world was extremely real, even though he had cultivated to the peak of the zenith heaven truth Tao, which was equivalent to surpassing the 9th stage of the immortal realm in the Tianyuan Great World, he could not change the fundamental concept that existed in the deepest part of his heart. However, it could not change the root concept in the deepest part of his heart. It could not make him completely believe in Pangu's worldview, and it could not make him treat the construction of the primordial world as the truth. In particular, he even had a clone in the Tianyuan Great World and the Earth universe. He had come into contact with the impact of another perfect world, so it was even more impossible for him to accept Pangu's worldview without doubt. It was precisely because of this that the Tao fruit Tao, which he used to regard as a ladder to achieve Tao, was not completely suitable for him. If he wanted to rely on this Tao fruit grand Tao to attain chaotic Tao fruit and attain eternity and indestructibility, then this Tao fruit grand Tao had to change its foundation and make it completely conform to his own view of the world, and only then would it be possible for him to accomplish it without the slightest doubt. In fact, such a process was also a process that any saint had experienced. It was also a process that any Tao master in the Tianyuan Great World who wanted to become a saint was going through. Perhaps from another point of view, a saint was already an existence that could transcend heaven and earth and transcend time and space. Such an existence could already create an eternal world in the state of chaos. Although the saint might have to pay a huge price to create a perfect world, such as turning himself into all things, he still had such an ability after all. The reason why a saint could be eternal and indestructible was that he could already exist in the chaos without being swallowed and assimilated by the state of chaos. The ability to create an eternal and indestructible world seemed to have nothing to do with the ability to exist in the chaos, but in fact, the two were the same thing. The state of chaos was extremely chaotic and mysterious. Time, space, matter, and energy were all constructed in a way that Luo Fan could not understand, in a way that could swallow and assimilate everything. Therefore, to be able to exist in the state of chaos, one needed to have their own order that was above this kind of chaos. The world that the saint had created, the eternal existence of the world, and the saint himself clearly had such a quality. And the pinnacle of order was the worldview. That was to say, only a worldview that was incomparably perfect, had absolute faith in itself, had no doubts, and felt that this was the truth of the universe could allow the order of one's existence to be above the boundless state of chaos. Only then could the world constructed by this order be able to exist eternally in the state of chaos. As Luo Fan thought about all this, the smile on his face gradually disappeared. Sorting out his own worldview was an incomparably grand project. In particular, he had seen more worlds. After seeing so many worldviews, it was more difficult than others to completely eliminate their influence and sort out the worldview that he believed to be the truth. Understanding how huge the project he was about to undertake was, Luo Fan stopped looking at the untainted world. Instead, he slowly closed his eyes and touched an incomparably mysterious feeling that existed in the depths of his heart. In an instant, his will passed through a mysterious and unpredictable channel. He sensed a powerful will from an unknown distance. Such a will was still much weaker than his own will, but it was more than 10,000 times stronger than his clone in the Tianyuan world. Such a will obviously belonged to his clone in the Earth universe. Luo Fan's clone in the Earth's universe cultivated the innate golden core Tao of the Earth's universe. Although he had already achieved the innate golden core without any impurities and was considered to have become a grand Luo innate golden core, which was considered to have reached the great perfection, the innate golden core Tao was still inferior to the Tao fruit Tao that Luo Fan's clone cultivated. Moreover, this clone did not cultivate the golden core Tao to the limit. In terms of cultivation realm, it was still not appropriate, and was only equivalent to a zenith heaven true immortal. Naturally, it was far inferior to the clone. However, it was a zenith heaven true immortal after all, and it was many times stronger than the clone in the Tianyuan world. At this moment, more than 60,000 years had passed since the clone in the Earth universe opened up the major chiliocosm and cultivated in seclusion. The Earth universe, the untainted world, and the Tianyuan world were in completely different spacetimes. The difference between different spacetimes was extremely mysterious, and it was not just a difference in the flow of time. Instead, the time was completely different. The difference in time was very simple. An instant in the untainted world might be an instant in another world, or it might be millions of years. It might even be negative time. The so-called negative time. It was when the untainted world connected to another world after an instant. The time in the other world might be a certain period of time before the time it was connected to a moment ago. Therefore, although it had been hundreds of thousands of years since the last time Luo Fan's clone had contacted the Earth universe, only 60,000 years had passed in the Earth universe. At this moment, the clone in the Earth universe was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, comprehending the connate zenith heaven. He worked hard to increase his cultivation realm, hoping to get closer to the great Tao of the Earth universe, so that his quality could be continuously sublimated. Suddenly, a connection from the clone connected to his soul. He could not help but tremble, and he instantly woke up from the mysterious state of no one and no me. What's going on? I've already completed my mission. Why did the clone suddenly contact me? The clone thought. As the first clone that Luo Fan had created, the clone had long become an extremely mysterious individual due to various opportunities. It was not just a clone, nor was it a clone. Instead, it had become a mysterious existence that was similar to the self that had been severed by the three corpses. Therefore, compared to the clone of the Tianyuan world, it was better in terms of existence. However, it also had more autonomous thoughts. Although he thought that, the clone naturally did not waste any time. With a thought, he instantly connected to the mysterious channel and connected to the will of the body that was billions of times more vast than before. The last time the clone and the body were connected, the body had yet to attain the zenith heaven Tao fruit. It was still at the peak of the primordial unity metal number. The clone was much stronger than the body. At that moment, the situation was suddenly reversed. The clone was tens of thousands of times weaker than the body. For a moment, the clone was shocked. Both the clone and the body were Luo Fan. Therefore, the moment the mysterious channel was established, the feeling between the two was instantly shared. Without the need to communicate telepathically, the main body instantly sensed the split body's shock. After the split body recovered from the shock, it also understood the mysterious feeling that the main body had from understanding the importance of the world. For a moment, everything was silent. This process seemed to take a long time, but in fact, there was almost no time interval. The moment the connection was established, everything was completed. Then, Luo Fan's body did not waste any time. In an instant, a thought wrapped in the thoughts of the 6 Tao Masters was sent through the mysterious channel. In an instant, it appeared in the mind of the clone of Luo Fan. After all this was done, the mysterious connection instantly became intermittent. It was as if it was affected by some incredible power and became difficult to maintain. There was no need to say anything. The body and the clone cut off the connection at the same time. Both the body and the clone were Luo Fan. Their minds were connected. As long as the matter was done, they would naturally understand each other's feelings. There was no need for any explanation or chatting. To be continued. Chapter 805. Luo Fan's doppelganger had been cultivating in the vast thousand world for more than 60,000 years. His cultivation realm had also made great progress compared to before. First published Baidu Search, Web, fast-reading novel. He had a deeper understanding of the great way of the Earth's universe. The power of his magic was more than 100 times stronger than when he had first entered the vast thousand world. After receiving the information body of the inheritance of the 6 Tao Masters from the untainted universe body, he was in an indescribable shock. The turbulent emotions could not be calmed for a long time. It took him a long time to calm down. I see. Turns out that we have all gone the wrong way. There is indeed a huge gap between a perfect world and a great world. Luo Fan's doppelganger thought. During this period of time, the vast thousand world had given birth to many living beings. However, most of the cultivation of the 844 doppelganger were just animals and plants. There had yet to be any intelligent living beings like humans. After all, it had only been more than 60,000 years. This period of time might be extremely long for ordinary living beings, but for the evolution of a world, it was unimaginably short. It was no different from an instant. How could it be so easy to evolve intelligent living beings? Although the doppelganger was very different from Luo Fan's body, it was still Luo Fan's after all. The doppelganger also had the various experiences of the doppelganger. He naturally understood that if he wanted to truly achieve a breakthrough, to truly achieve the fruit of chaos, and to reach the sage realm, having his own worldview would be the most important thing. Although the doppelganger had comprehended the inheritance of the 6 Tao Masters, he had extracted their cultivation gist of truth and their worldview. However, Luo Fan's doppelganger did not intend to accept it completely. He did not intend to regard the result as his own understanding. Instead, he intended to comprehend the inheritance of the 6 Tao Masters and extract their worldview. After all, the doppelganger and the doppelganger were no longer one. Although they were the same in substance, it was impossible for his thoughts to be the same. The comprehension of the doppelganger had a huge inspiration to him. Most of the doppelganger's cultivation might even be the same as what he had comprehended himself. However, there would still be some differences between the comprehensions. This was different for those who were interested in the primordial Tao fruit. For the avatars that were aiming for the Saint Realm, the impact was quite huge. Therefore, he had to go through the process of comprehension again. He had to use his own mind, his own soul, and his own will to comprehend the inheritance of the 6 Tao Masters. Anyway, it was not a difficult task. It would just take a few more years. For the clone that had already formed the innate flawless golden core, time didn't seem to have much meaning. Even if it was wasted, it wouldn't be too much of a pity. With this determination, the clone naturally entered the process of comprehending the 6 legacies, just like when the original body obtained the 6 great Tao Masters' legacies. Because they were all Luo Fan, the order in which they comprehended the inheritance of the 6 great Tao exalts was exactly the same. Similarly, they both chose to comprehend the inheritance information body of Tao Master Dali at the beginning. This clone was tens of thousands of times weaker than the original. His comprehension ability was also much weaker than his physical body. Thus, when he was in the physical body, he spent 3 years to completely comprehend the inheritance of great strength Tao Sovereign. He completely extracted the true meaning of cultivation and the world view. However, even though this clone had the results of the original's comprehension as a reference, it still took him 300 years to achieve the same effect as the original. Of course, there were also subtle differences in the conclusions they obtained. This difference seemed insignificant, but it represented the difference between the original and the clone. It was the root of why the clone was no longer the clone. After carefully savoring the results, Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. It was different from the original body. The will doppelganger was formed from the will of the doppelganger. All the feelings, changes, and perspectives of the will doppelganger were no different from the doppelganger's own feelings, changes, and perspective. Therefore, he had a better understanding of the perspective of power than the original body. Therefore, He had a better understanding of how incredible and amazing Tao Master Dali's worldview was. This kind of Dharma access, this kind of worldview, is really too suitable for the will doppelganger. If I were a cultivator who achieved the Tao through power, it would be a simple matter for me to directly cultivate this Dharma access and believe in this kind of worldview. Luo Fan's clone exclaimed in admiration. Just as he was exclaiming in admiration, an invisible creature gradually condensed in front of him. The creature was faintly discernible. Even Luo Fan himself could only rely on his own connection with the creature to perceive its existence. The creature was none other than his will doppelganger. Over the years, this will doppelganger had also been working hard to comprehend the great way of the earth and the universe, working hard to improve its own Tao realm, just like Luo Fan's clone. At this moment, its power was hundreds of times stronger than before. If it had met him in the past, perhaps it would have been enough to turn him into dust with just a casual thought. This will doppelganger was here? P being chased by Kugue? Emperor Yun? How can I forgive my hemorrhoids? P. The connection between the doppelganger was even closer than the connection between the doppelganger. Naturally, there was no need for communication. Luo Fan's will doppelganger moved, and the inheritance information body of Tao Master Dali instantly flowed into the mind of the will doppelganger. The will doppelganger did not need anything from Luo Fan, nor did it need his consciousness to wake up. After receiving the inheritance information body of Tao Master Dali, it directly sat cross-legged and began to practice the most basic entry-level Dharma access recorded in the will doppelganger. The inheritance of Tao Master Dali was simply specially created for the will doppelganger who achieved the Tao through power. Although this was only the most basic entry-level Dharma access, after practicing this Dharma access, Luo Fan felt that the will doppelganger began to change inexplicably. A vague figure gradually appeared from nothing in front of Luo Fan's will doppelganger. This figure was the body of the will doppelganger. In the past, the will doppelganger could also show a form, but that form was not its true form. It was just a form of transformation. As long as he did not use his power or magic powers, the form would disappear. It would completely transform into the formless, almost imperceptible form it had before. But at this moment, from nothing to existence, from a vague form to a clear form. It was completely a real body of flesh and blood, but it was the most direct form, not the previous form of transformation. In other words, after this form was completely formed, even if he did not use his magic powers or magic powers, he would be able to maintain this form, and it would no longer become formless. This change seemed to be just a change in the state of the body, almost as if it was retreating, but in fact, the appearance of this form was the foundation of Tao Master Dali's cultivation. It was the root of Tao Master Dali's inheritance. Although Tao Master Dali's worldview was completely different from the worldview of ordinary creatures, his body was still born from the heavens and earth. Before transcending the heavens and earth, they were all existences that had to rely on the heavens and earth to survive. Before he transcended the heavens and earth, if he wanted to cultivate supreme magic powers, then he would naturally have to obey the laws of the heavens and earth. If he wanted to cultivate supreme magic powers, then he would naturally have to obey the laws of the heavens and earth, as well as the great Tao. And obviously, for any heavens and earth, even for a great world like the great Tianyuan world, the best form for cultivation was definitely the born Taoism body. Even if the laws, and great Tao of any heavens and earth were different, the born Taoism body's form would be different. Thus, creatures that achieved Tao through power wanted to use the fastest and most stable method to achieve supreme magic powers. In order to achieve magic powers, they would naturally need to have the born Taoism body. And the born Taoism body was clearly not just a form, but also a way of existence. Just like Luo Fan, who had condensed a Kanei Taoism form, it looked like he had already formed a Kanei Taoism form. However, because it still existed in the form of power, he still hadn't completely obtained all the mysteries of a Kane Taoism form, and he couldn't achieve the most stable form. The fastest cultivation aptitude. For a cultivation path that led straight to the Saint Realm, this was clearly an unforgivable oversight. It was precisely because of this that the great strength Tao Lord's inheritance required him to refine a born Taoism body at the very beginning, the most basic cultivation. With Luo Fan's Xiantian immaculate and leakless gold core, it was naturally not difficult for him to cultivate this most basic and fundamental cultivation method. In particular, he had done things like refining the born Taoism body countless times, so he naturally did not find this process difficult. Therefore, during the 300 years that Luo Fan's doppelganger had comprehended the inheritance of the Lord of Darkness, Luo Fan's doppelganger had completed the most basic step. He had completely transformed his body from its original form of power into the appearance of a born Taoism body. Moreover, this change was not like the usual creation of the born Taoism body. Instead, he used a special method to completely integrate the quality of his own power into the born Taoism body. As soon as the born Taoism body was formed, it had all kinds of divine sense and power that the original body of power had. Moreover, because of the change in the composition of his body, he had more control over these divine sense and power than before. However, in the process of using the divine sense and power, he could sense the specific details of the divine sense and power, and could even vaguely sense the principle behind it. This was many times better than the way the previous body of power used to be. This will doppelganger also had a part of Luo Fan's will. Therefore, when the clone of the Earth universe, which was also the body of this will doppelganger, was comprehending the inheritance of the Supreme Tao Master, this will doppelganger also had the ability to think, but it also knew how to sigh, deduce, and judge. After a slight sigh about how powerful the inheritance of the great strength Tao Lord was, Luo Fan began to practice the next cultivation method according to the order of the inheritance. In the inheritance of great strength Tao Master, there were a large number of cultivation methods, covering almost all aspects. Everything that was involved in cultivation was included in it, like an incomparably complete cultivation system. In fact, every Tao Lord's inheritance that Luo Fan had obtained was such a complete cultivation system, covering all aspects that might be involved in cultivation, including body refining, spirit refining, alchemy, weapon refining, chi refining, body refining, swordsmanship, bladesmanship. It could be thrown into a brand new world without any cultivation, and it would definitely be able to create an extremely prosperous cultivation civilization that was completely compatible with the Tao Lord's inheritance. Therefore, for Luo Fan's clone, even if he had the cultivation of the Zenith Heaven realm, it was unrealistic to completely practice the inheritance of the great strength Tao Lord in a short period of time. Based on his grasp of the cultivation process, he understood that after he mastered the most basic cultivation method and achieved the innate Taoism body, the realm he reached because of the cultivation method of the great strength Tao Lord. It was probably equivalent to the second stage of the mortal realm in the Tianyuan universe. Although such an achievement seemed insignificant, it built the most solid foundation, giving him the potential to climb to the highest peak. It was so much so that the thousands of cultivation techniques from the next cultivation technique onwards were constantly strengthening his foundation and increasing his potential. It allowed him to have more and greater potential to climb to the highest peak. Luo Fan could even feel that these cultivation methods were completely trying to suppress his realm to the lowest possible realm. If possible, it would be best to suppress it to the level of the mortal realm, until it could not be suppressed anymore. His foundation had already been consolidated to the point that it could not be further consolidated. Just now, he had obtained a breakthrough. It was precisely because of this that after the thousands of cultivation methods were mastered, the foundation of Luo Fan's clone had been consolidated to an unimaginable level. It even faintly surpassed his body in the untainted land, and even surpassed the first living being in the untainted land, Hong Jun. If the cultivation foundation of ordinary living beings that could cultivate to the immortal realm, which was the living beings that could cultivate to the gold core in the Earth universe, had a cultivation foundation of a grain of sand, then the cultivation foundation of Luo Fan's clone would be as huge as the Earth. With such a cultivation foundation, even if the clone did not have the support of Luo Fan's will and the cultivation of the Zenith Heaven realm, if it wanted to become a Zenith Heaven realm, it was only a matter of time. Even if it wanted to become a Tao Master, it would be hundreds of millions of times easier than ordinary living beings. Although it was not certain that it would succeed, there was still a 50 to 60% possibility. This was the incredible and magical effect of the inheritance of the great strength Tao Lord. However, it was not without any cost to solidify Ji Chun to such an incredible level. He had spent hundreds of thousands of years to strengthen his will doppelganger to such a degree. At this moment, the cultivation realm that he had attained because of these cultivation techniques, of course, it was not the current cultivation realm of this will doppelganger. The doppelganger's cultivation realm did not suffer any loss, and it was still in the grand heavenly realm, was only equivalent to the peak of the mortal realm in the great heaven primordial world. This cultivation speed was almost 1,000,000,000,000 times slower than Luo Fan's normal cultivation speed. With Luo Fan's ability, it would only take a thought for his clone to become a Zenith Heaven realm from nothing. Why would he need to spend hundreds of thousands of years to cultivate? Although the cultivation method of the great strength Tao Lord is good, it's too slow. Fortunately, I achieved the Tao through strength, so there is no limit to Yuan. If it was an ordinary living being, how could they have such a long Yuan and spend hundreds of thousands of years to cultivate such a method? Luo Fan's clone thought so. During these hundreds of thousands of years, he had been sitting cross-legged and cultivating in this colossal world beside his body, which was also Luo Fan's clone. Among the many cultivation methods passed down by the great strength Tao Lord, almost every one of them required endless Yuan Qi to cultivate. If the colossal world was not created by Luo Fan and was filled with endless innate Yuan Qi, and these innate Yuan Qi could be gathered by him with just a thought, it would probably take him several times longer to cultivate these thousands of cultivation methods. After lamenting in his heart, the clone came back to his senses. With a slight thought, he understood what his body, which was also Luo Fan's clone on Earth, had been doing in the past hundreds of thousands of years, and what it was doing at this moment. In the past hundreds of thousands of years, the clone of Luo Fan had been comprehending the inheritance of the 6 great Tao Venerables, taking out the true meaning of cultivation and worldview of the 6 great Tao Venerables. After taking out the true meaning of cultivation and worldview, the clone began to do what the clone had been doing with the great Tianyuan world clone, sorting out its own worldview. Up until now, hundreds of thousands of years had passed, and the process was still going on. Sensing what the clone was doing, the clone did not disturb it, and directly began to cultivate. At this moment, with the cultivation of the inheritance of the great strength Tao Master, although he was only at the peak of the 9th stage of the mortal realm, even if he did not use the power of his original divine sense, just the power of the divine sense he had cultivated in the past hundreds of thousands of years, he could at least exert the strength beyond the 4th stage of the immortal realm. In this situation, it was like in the untainted world, when a cultivator in the crossing disaster realm exerted the strength of a Tai disbanded immortal. It could be imagined how great the gap was. The inheritance of the Herculean Tao Lord was astonishing, which was evident from this. At this moment, the clone of Luo Fan's will was sitting cross-legged around the clone of Luo Fan. It had a strange charm that was tens of thousands of times weaker than that of the clone of the Zenith Heaven True Immortal, but it was unimaginably tough. It seemed that even the destruction of the world could not erase it. It was this wonderful charm that made the clone's sense of existence not inferior to that of Luo Fan's clone, and even stronger. If you like this work, you are welcome to Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 806. After 100,000 years of building his foundation and expanding his potential, the will clone naturally needed to break through the barrier between the mortal realm and the immortal realm with the help of Tao Venerate Hercules' inheritance. Text first. The barrier between the immortal realm and the mortal realm was not difficult for Luo Fan, but there was a qualitative difference between using Tao Venerate Hercules' inheritance and using other methods to make a breakthrough. Such a breakthrough was a change in the quality of life, as well as the quality of power. After completing this breakthrough, all the power in the body of the cultivator who cultivated the inheritance of Tao's sovereign great strength would change its nature. It would merge the thousands of powers cultivated from the thousands of cultivation methods into one, causing it to undergo an unimaginable transformation. In the end, this power would be pushed to the point where it was close to the source of power. Of course, it was only close. In fact, the entire cultivation process of the 9 stages of the immortal realm was a process of removing the word close. Even the final 5 stages beyond the 9 stages of the immortal realm belonged to this process, and one also had to do their best to remove the word close. In fact, it wasn't absurd to strive to achieve this goal by crossing the 9 stages of the immortal realm, which was hundreds of millions of times larger. The difference between the quality of power close to the source of power and the true source of power might be negligible in the eyes of ordinary living beings, but in the eyes of living beings who truly cultivated power, such as those who cultivated Tao Venerate Hercules, the difference was countless times greater than the difference between the 9 stages of the immortal realm and the sage realm. It was an almost infinite gap. And in the inheritance of Tao Venerate Hercules, the final achievement, the moment when the power completely protected the source of power, was the moment when the cultivator reached the sage realm. From this, it could be seen how huge the difference between being close to the source of power and truly reaching it was. Luo Fan's will clone was formed from the cultivation of a grand heavenly realm power. Although this power was close to perfection, and even had enough reason to develop its own intelligence, in the eyes of Tao Venerate Hercules, at least in the various descriptions of this power, although it was strong, it was so crude that it could not be cleaned up. It was so crude that one could not bear to look at it. Therefore, for the inheritance of the great strength Tao Lord, if it was the quality of Luo Fan's will clone, if he really wanted to achieve his ultimate goal, he needed to change his nature. He needed to completely change the nature of the power he came from and perfect the rough and crude parts of it countless times. In order to break through the barrier between immortal and mortal, one needed to condense a power that was close to the source of power. For the average cultivator, it was just cultivating a type of power. Although it was difficult, it was still just changing an external object. However, for Luo Fan's consciousness clone, this process was equivalent to changing his own nature. Compared to changing external objects, it was thousands of times more difficult. However, it was precisely because this change was so difficult that once it succeeded, the benefits that Luo Fan's avatar would obtain would be thousands of times greater than that of an ordinary cultivator. This would make the process of removing the word approach 1,000 times smoother than that of other cultivators. Luo Fan's consciousness avatar sat cross-legged beside his own body, expelling all the elemental energy around his body. A void of elemental energy with a radius of hundreds of meters appeared around him. When he cultivated the thousands of cultivation methods before, he needed an endless amount of elemental energy to enrich the power he cultivated. However, breaking through the barrier between immortal and mortal was the complete opposite. It was all for the thousands of strands of power in his body. He needed to completely eliminate the influence of the elemental energy in the outside world on the power in his body. Only in this way could the final strand of power be closer to the source of power. In the void of elemental energy, Luo Fan's avatar sat cross-legged with his eyes closed. The thousands of strands of power in his body were constantly shuttling inside and outside his body in an extremely mysterious and complicated way. They were constantly moving around. Every strand of power was pure enough to shock any cultivator. Every strand of power was enough to make any cultivator treat it as a treasure passed down from generation to generation. He treated it as the core of his power. Moreover, every single strand of energy contained some sort of unbelievable might. It could be said that every single strand of energy had reached the limits of a certain aspect, and it could be said that every single strand of energy had reached the limits of a certain aspect, and it could unleash the peak of a certain aspect's power. The thousands of strands of power were shuttling inside and outside of Luo Fan's body, trying hard to connect with the other strands of power, fusing with each other, and trying hard to become one. An indescribable wave gradually appeared and surrounded Luo Fan's consciousness avatar. It gradually resonated with the thousands of strands of power, causing them to gradually connect with the wave. The thousands of strands of power were gradually influenced and guided by the wave. The way in which every strand of power circulated was undergoing some kind of indescribable micro-adjustment. The trajectory of every strand of power was becoming more and more mysterious and incredible. The connection between the strands of power was also becoming tighter and tighter. An indescribable feeling of repulsion and attraction was produced between any two strands of power at the same time. That kind of repulsion made any two strands of power try their best to stay away from each other, and that kind of attraction made any two strands of power try their best to get close to each other. This kind of repulsion and attraction made the thousands of strands of power form an incomparably complicated operating system. The system shook violently and could not stabilize for a long time, but it was moving in a stable direction. In the inheritance of vigorous Tao Master, the way to break through the barrier between immortal and mortal was actually not complicated. It was to adjust such a system and finally use one's own will to directly balance all the repulsion and attraction. In the end, all the strands of power would be integrated into one, and finally produce a power that was close to the source of power. Then with this power, one's soul, body, and life quality would be changed, and one could break through the barrier between immortal and mortal. With this awareness, Luo Fan's avatar did not have the slightest bit of impatience. He released his unimaginable will, enveloping his body inside and outside, and tried his best to control the thousands of strands of power. Obviously, the fusion of power was not a crude method of squeezing all the strands of power into a ball. It would only cause many strands of power to fight with each other, and all the different characteristics would constantly erupt. In the end, in such a battle, all the power would be consumed, or there would be a shocking explosion that would directly destroy everything. What was needed to fuse the power was through the understanding of the nature of the power, and little by little communicate the power that had common points together, and strive to string more and more power together. He did his best to eliminate the repulsion between them before finally using a certain method to eliminate all the conflicts and fuse the powers together. In the inheritance of vigorous Tao Master, there was such a method. Luo Fan's avatar inherited the will from Luo Fan's avatar. The strength of his will was far beyond the first stage of the immortal realm. Even after vigorous Tao Master broke through the barrier between immortal and mortal, it was comparable to the fifth stage of the immortal realm. It was also far superior. Therefore, compared to other cultivators, he had a huge advantage. With the control of his strong will, the range of the thousands of strands of power gradually shrank. From the original range of dozens of feet around his body to half a year later, it had completely shrunk back into his body. It had already completely shrunk back into his body. It was only limited to his body that was constantly circulating and circulating within his body. Although the repulsive and attractive force between the thousands of strands of power had not reached the most balanced state, it was gradually approaching that level and gradually becoming stable. The thousands of forces repelled and attracted each other. Under normal circumstances, if they were not controlled and allowed to operate naturally, it would take a lot of effort to form a balance. It would take at least thousands of years to achieve this. And this was under the situation where the thousands of strands of power were running extremely fast. If the speed of those strands of power was a little slower, the time would be increased by several times or even dozens of times. At this time, it was only half a year that he was able to achieve this step, naturally thanks to the control of the strong will of Luo Fan's avatar. Completely stabilizing the system formed by these strands of power was a necessary process to completely fuse all the strands of power. In order to completely fuse these strands of power together, these strands of power must first be stable. If these strands of power could be released at any time, then how could they be compressed? How could they be fused into one? Luo Fan was not in a hurry, nor was he arrogant or rash. He worked hard to control the thousands of strands of power, worked hard to fine-tune them, and worked hard to change the ripples produced by the cultivation method according to the description of the cultivation method. At the same time, he constantly adjusted the repulsive and attractive force between the thousands of strands of power, adjusting them in the direction that Luo Fan wanted. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. At a certain moment after 3 years, Luo Fan's avatar suddenly opened his eyes, and the mysterious ripples that enveloped his body instantly disappeared. The innate energy that had been completely pushed out of the 1,000 feet radius in the past 3 years, forming a vacuum of 1,000 feet, instantly gathered towards the avatar's body. As if it had been thrown into a black hole, it wildly surged into the body of Luo Fan's will avatar. The innate energy surged in at an extremely fast speed, even forming an increasingly large vortex around Luo Fan's avatar. At first, the vortex only had a radius of a few dozen feet, but after a few dozen breaths, it had expanded to a radius of several dozen miles. Furthermore, it was still expanding, spreading out in all directions. At this moment, an extremely thin region of 1,000 feet had even appeared around Luo Fan's body, almost to the point of a vacuum. The formation of this region was completely different from the previous 3 years. Previously, it was because Luo Fan wanted to expel the surrounding Xiantian Yuan Qi, but at this moment, it was because the speed at which the Xiantian Yuan Qi surged into Luo Fan's body was too fast. It was almost instantly absorbed by him the moment it entered his range. Even the Xiantian Yuan Qi that was gathering crazily in the outside world, forming a vortex of dozens of miles or even hundreds of miles, was far from being able to replenish it in time. These two completely opposite methods had resulted in almost the same result. It was evident how miraculous it was. At this moment, Luo Fan's will avatar seemed to have sensed something and opened his eyes that had been shut for hundreds of thousands of years. With a slight thought, the entire vast thousand world changed slightly. In an instant, all the innate energy in the vast thousand world gathered towards this place and surged into the will avatar's body. The speed at which it surged was more than 1,000,000 times faster than when the will avatar was alone. If this kind of innate origin qi surged into another cultivator's body, then that cultivator would probably be reduced to dust in an instant and scatter in all directions. If it was condensed in the air, it would probably create thousands of football-sized innate energy solids in an instant. However, for Luo Fan's will avatar, this speed did not seem to have any effect on it at all. His face did not change in the slightest, and his body did not change in the slightest. In fact, there was not even the slightest tremor. It was as if this endless amount of innate energy had surged into a black hole that had nothing to do with him. Or rather, it should be said that this will avatar did not change at all. In the process of the endless amount of innate energy surging into it, a faint look of satisfaction appeared on the face of Luo Fan's will avatar. This kind of expression was very vague, but it really existed. After the endless amount of innate energy surged into the will avatar's body, Luo Fan's will avatar closed its eyes again. Tidying up one's worldview was simple and crude. If it was just a rough description, it would only take a few words. For example, Earth is the center of the universe, and countless stars revolve around Earth. This was actually a reasonable worldview. If Luo Fan only needed this kind of worldview, it would not take him long to sort it out. In fact, he would only need a thought to sort it out. However, this was not the worldview that Luo Fan needed. It was what he needed. It could explain everything in the world, the chaotic state, and even the state before the chaotic state. It could explain everything that he had encountered in his hundreds of millions of years of life. It could explain everything that he had heard, guessed, seen, and even every kind of thing that he had felt in the memories of other living beings. Every phenomenon, every kind of principle was extremely perfect. It could even be regarded as the truth by other living beings and even himself. It could be used as the foundation for his cultivation, and it could be used as a worldview that allowed him to prove the fruit of the origin. Such a worldview, compared to the simple worldview that only required a few words, it was completely different. There was even a difference in the complexity of the two that could not be described by numbers. Even though Luo Fan had spent hundreds of thousands of years to sort it out, he had only made some progress. However, he had only made some progress. He was still far from completing it. In this case, he naturally would not waste too much time on his will avatar. In this case, he naturally would not waste too much time on his will doppelganger. In fact, if this will doppelganger did not already have the ability to think, judge, and reason on its own, he might not have allowed this will doppelganger to cultivate the inheritance of great strength Tao Master. Instead, he would first put all his effort and spirit into sorting out the worldview, which was beyond imagination. Precisely because of this, after replenishing the innate yuan qi of the will doppelganger, Luo Fan's doppelganger closed his eyes again. His expression became calm and almost cold again, and he wholeheartedly immersed himself in the process of sorting out the worldview. Although Luo Fan's doppelganger was no longer in charge, the large amount of innate yuan qi that was condensing towards the doppelganger did not show any signs of stopping. Instead, it continued to condense towards Luo Fan's doppelganger at an unimaginable speed and strength. The entire process lasted for 9 days and 9 nights. After 9 days and 9 nights, Luo Fan's will doppelganger let out a soft cry. Without the use of any power, his body gradually floated up. At the same time, the boundless innate origin energy that was gathering towards him and forming a huge whirlpool also completely stopped in that instant, no longer pouring into his body. Even the endless innate yuan qi gathered by Luo Fan's doppelganger completely retreated at this moment. With the disappearance of the power that attracted and gathered, the innate yuan qi that had already gathered within a radius of several dozen miles around him, which was hundreds of times denser than in other places, suddenly stagnated. Then, it instantly exploded in all directions, creating a stream of air that was neither weak nor strong. It shone on the figure of the will doppelganger that was sitting cross-legged, making it look like the god of creation had descended to the world. Luo Fan's will doppelganger slowly opened his eyes. His body stretched slightly in midair, and he lightly landed on the ground. Although this power is not as strong as the original power, its quality is so amazing. Almost a portion of this power can exert a power that could only be exerted by tens of thousands of times in the past. The eyes of Luo Fan's will doppelganger were filled with surprise. He raised his right hand and placed it in front of him. There was an invisible power that was constantly changing in the palm of his hand. This power was extremely weak. Even an ordinary person's physical strength was thousands of times stronger than this. However, this power contained all sorts of unfathomable characteristics. It gave off an ancient aura, as if it contained the boundless world. It was as if all living beings could see and think of the power within it could be found within it. This power, which was thousands of times weaker than a mortal's physical strength, was constantly changing on the palm of Luo Fan's will doppelganger. At the same time, The surrounding space and time seemed to be subtly changing along with the changes of this power, as if they were being guided by this power. This mysterious and incredible power was obtained by Luo Fan after he broke through the barrier between immortal and mortal with the help of the inheritance of Tao Master of Vigor. It was a power that was close to the source of power. Of course, what appeared in Luo Fan's hand at this time was not all of that power, but only an insignificant trace of that power. Chapter 807. At this moment, Luo Fan's body was filled with a vast and mysterious power. The characteristics of this power were exactly the same as the power floating above his palm. They were both mysterious and unfathomable, and both had a mysterious source of power. His life essence, the quality of his zenith heaven-level power, had been completely changed by this power. His life essence had changed from its original state to a power that was close to the source of power. In other words, at this moment, if he reverted to his original body would no longer look like before. Instead, he would become the vast power in his body. This change was so mysterious and unbelievable that even Luo Fan, who was already aware of it, revealed an inexplicable look of amazement from path 846. Changing the quality of life and changing one's body into another form of existence. Although this method only appeared when breaking through the barrier between immortal and mortal, the meaning behind it was extremely profound. It meant that the cultivator who created this method and left behind this inheritance had a deep understanding of the quality of power, as well as a strong grasp of the quality of life. He raised his eyes and looked around. The world in his eyes had undergone a mysterious change compared to before. Previously, when he observed the universe from the perspective of this power, the entire universe was colorful and had no physical form. It was like a world where only light existed. At this moment, although the world was still the same, the colors he saw were much more colorful. Moreover, he didn't even need to think about the power behind the colors. He could see through it with a glance. With just a thought, he could completely understand how everything he saw looked in the eyes of ordinary people. He could see behind the appearance of the colors and the reason why they had such an appearance. Countless scenes that he could not see in the past instantly appeared in front of Luo Fan's consciousness clone. In an instant, Luo Fan used the eyes of his path 846 to see the answers to many complicated problems that he had encountered in the past hundreds of thousands of years. All kinds of mysterious enlightenment continuously circulated in his mind, making him feel that his understanding of power had become deeper and deeper. He understood the quality of the power in this world more and more. In a trance, he had a deep understanding of the various realms described in the inheritance of the great strength Tao Master. Because of all these changes, his respect for the Herculean Tao Venerable had unknowingly risen to a higher level. Suspended in midair, Luo Fan stretched his body slightly. Instantly, he felt as if the entire universe was stretching along with him. With a thought, the power in his hand trembled and turned into a small bird. It flapped its wings and flew into the sky, circling above his head. Crisp bird cries came from the small bird's mouth. Following that, the bird changed into a much smaller dragonfly after circling a few times, hovering in the void. Then, countless types of living creatures appeared above Luo Fan's head. Every single one of them was vivid and lifelike, and one could even faintly see the boundless spirituality they possessed. It was as if they were real living creatures. This was a trivial function of the power that Luo Fan had cultivated through the inheritance of the Herculean Tao Venerable. The source of power was the source of all power. In the world view of the Herculean Tao Venerable, the universe, the boundless state of chaos, and even the state before the state of chaos, were all composed of power. They were formed by the combination of certain kinds of power through some special construction method. Obviously, under such a worldview, all living things were constructed from power. Since that was the case, the source of power that could transform any kind of power to construct all kinds of creatures was obviously a matter of course, and there was nothing absurd about it. Although the power that Luo Fan had cultivated was only close to the source of power, and there was still a huge gap between it and the true source of power, it didn't need the true source of power to construct these creatures. With the power that was close to the source of power, it was already enough to do all of this. Luo Fan floated in the void and raised his head to look at the changes in his power. The depths of his eyes flashed with the light of wisdom, and the degree of familiarity and control of the power inside his body rose at an unimaginable speed. After an unknown period of time, Luo Fan came back to his senses and withdrew the power that was constantly changing the shapes of various living creatures into his body. His figure also slowly descended. The inheritance of the Herculean Tao Venerable is really wonderful. Fortunately, I cultivated it. Otherwise, I'm afraid I would only be able to see the moon in the water and see the flowers in the fog. It is impossible to really understand how wonderful it is. Luo Fan's thought doppelganger sighed. He looked at his doppelganger that was still sorting out the world view, shook his head, and took a step out of the vast thousand world. There was infinite primordial chi in the vast thousand world. For ordinary cultivators, it had endless benefit. It was a holy land that they would not want to leave even if they were beaten to death. But for the doppelganger that had already cultivated the inheritance of the Herculean Tao Venerable to the immortal realm, broke through the barrier between immortal and mortal, and completely changed its life quality, it did not have much meaning. After reaching the immortal realm, according to the division of the Earth universe, it was after cultivating the primordial gold core. This doppelganger still needed infinite primordial chi to increase the strength of its power, but the important thing was to absorb all kinds of power in the Earth universe and integrate these power into its own power with the inheritance of the Herculean Tao Venerable, so that the power in its body was closer and closer to the source of power. Of course, this was only the cultivation of power. The cultivation of the realm, mind, and divine soul was countless times more complicated than simple cultivation, but it could not be explained clearly in a few words. That was also the essence of the Herculean Tao Venerable's inheritance. However, in any case, the doppelganger that cultivated the inheritance of the Herculean Tao Venerable could not just stay in the vast thousand world and cultivate according to the cultivation method to the peak. It was impossible to finally become a Tao master, or even surpass a Tao master to achieve the primordial Tao fruit. Luo Fan's doppelganger also had its own judgment and thinking ability. Anyway, for him at this time, as long as the doppelganger and the body belonged to the same perfect world, the spiritual connection would not be broken, and even the distance would not be a big obstacle. In this case, when he knew that cultivation required him to leave the vast thousand world and travel to various places in the Earth universe to find all kinds of power, the doppelganger naturally would not hesitate. That was why such a change happened at this time. Looking around, Luo Fan's doppelganger took a step forward, and his figure instantly turned into nothingness. With the help of the surrounding power of time and space, he moved the void in an instant, crossed a distance of countless light years, and came to a place where a galaxy was located. The star of this galaxy was tens of millions of times the size of the Earth's sun. There were more than 300 planets in the entire galaxy, of which 1/10 had life, and the rest were uninhabited planets with all kinds of treasures. Among these planets with life, there was only one planet with a cultivation civilization. However, even this planet with a cultivation civilization was only at a very low level, and even immortality was only a vague legend. In other words, the cultivation civilization of this planet was not strong enough to break through the limits of the atmosphere and step into the void of the universe. Therefore, even if there was a cultivation civilization in this galaxy, other planets without cultivation civilization were not enslaved or occupied because of its existence. The reason why Luo Fan's doppelganger came here this time was not because of the cultivation civilization in this location, but because it was on a planet with life without a cultivation civilization. This planet is developing a biotechnological civilization. The reason why it attracted Luo Fan from countless light years away was that this planet's biochemical civilization had created, or rather, extracted a kind of power that Luo Fan had never seen before, a power that was extremely beneficial to the power in his body, which was close to the source of power. When Luo Fan's doppelganger entered the perspective of power to observe this Earth universe, the world he saw in his eyes was completely different from the world in the eyes of ordinary living beings. In this perspective, distance became a power. Therefore, although it was unknown how many light years away they were, such a power seemed to be right in front of Luo Fan's doppelganger's eyes. This led to the current situation. This power, which Luo Fan had never seen before, was not the closest power to the location where the vast thousand worlds were attached, but it was the first power that Luo Fan chose. Floating outside the galaxy and carefully observing a planet in the galaxy, Luo Fan's face revealed an inexplicable joy. That planet was Luo Fan's destination, and it was also the reason why Luo Fan had traveled countless light years to arrive. This planet exuded an incomparably powerful vitality. The entire planet was about the size of 10 Earth. In this entire galaxy, it could only be considered the smallest planet. However, the number of living beings on it was the highest among all the planets with life. The life on this planet was a humanoid life form, but there were some differences from humans in the details. This was not an incredible coincidence, nor was it the result of the control of a powerful cultivator. It was just an inevitability caused by the natural evolution of the Earth universe. The innate Tao body of the Earth universe was also in the shape of a human, just like the primordial world. In other words, the creator of the Earth universe and the primordial world was also in the shape of a human, similar to the current appearance of Luo Fan's doppelganger. Therefore, it could be seen that the humanoid life form in the Earth universe was bound to be more compatible with the environment, the world, and the universe. In other words, it was easier for the humanoid life form to survive in the Earth universe. Under such circumstances, it was clear that the possibility of humanoid life forms evolving to possess intelligence and developing various civilizations was much higher. The result of this was that among the many intelligent life forms in the Earth universe, there would be more humanoid life forms, which were similar to the innate Tao form, than other life forms. Obviously, what Luo Fan encountered at this time was one of the most intelligent life forms. On the surface of the smallest planet in the entire galaxy, there were more than 30 billion intelligent life forms. These 30 billion intelligent life forms lived densely on a planet that was 10 times larger than the Earth. Although they did not fill the planet to the brim, compared to dozens of other planets with life, the burden on this planet was thousands of times heavier. The power that Luo Fan was paying attention to was in a layer of this planet. There were countless weapons brewing powerful power around it. There were even huge creatures that were comparable to cultivators in the crossing disaster realm, which was also the 9th stage of the mortal realm. Obviously, that power was not an ownerless existence. Instead, it was a power that the intelligent life forms on this planet had synthesized through some method and were using. Perhaps no living being in the entire galaxy could snatch such a defense, but for Luo Fan, it was not a problem at all. If he wanted to, he could take that power out of the planet with a wave of his hand and directly absorb it into his body. However, that was not what Luo Fan wanted. Obtaining power was naturally important, but figuring out how this power was synthesized, what they did to it, how they used it, what price they paid, and figuring out the characteristics of that power was also quite useful to him. Therefore, Luo Fan took a step forward and directly crossed a long distance. He directly passed through the thick atmosphere of the planet and arrived somewhere on the surface of the planet. As soon as he entered the planet, he felt as if he had come to a world of science fiction. The entire planet was filled with all kinds of buildings, vehicles, and various facilities that could only appear in the imagination of mortals on Earth. The civilization of this planet was obviously several levels higher than that of the Earth before Luo Fan traveled to it. The sky, the ground, the ocean, and above the cloud. Other than space, almost everything that could be used had been used. However, the foundation of this civilization was not machinery but life. It was biochemical technology. He could faintly see many traces of life in the buildings and various facilities. It was just like the high-rise buildings that people lived in, and the vehicles that looked like flying cars were just life forms that people could ride in. Luo Fan lifted his feet and landed on the top of a building that rose from the ground. It was at least 1,000 stories tall. The feeling of stepping on it was not much different from that of ordinary buildings, but he could instantly sense that the building contained a wave of vitality. There was even a vague existence of consciousness. Clearly, as he had expected, this was a kind of life form that had been cultivated. Deep under the building was the location of the power that Luo Fan's clone had sensed. This was clearly the reason why he had landed here. With a slight thought, his body had already transformed into the ordinary shape of life on this planet. In fact, there was not much change. He just slightly elongated his body and slightly changed the proportion of his body. After doing all this, he slowly walked down. To him, everything in the universe was condensed from power, and passing through power was not difficult for him, whose body was also made up of power. Therefore, the obstruction of the building seemed to not exist to him. He did not even need to use his magic power. As long as he thought about it, he could naturally cross over at will. These floors might be difficult for ordinary creatures to cross, but to him it was like a flight of stairs. Each step was a floor, and before he took each step, his mind instructs, in a second, was instantly sent out, incorporating everything that happened on that floor into his mind instructs, in a second. Therefore, when he walked down the 1,000-story building, his understanding of the various situations on this planet had reached a level that was deeper than that of a normal person on this planet. The 1,000-story building was built above that power, and that power was surrounded by a defense that the star system could not penetrate. Therefore, it was obvious that the building was not simple, and the living beings within it were not ordinary either. In order to be as tall as a 1,000-story building, the area of the building would not be too small. Therefore, each story had at least several thousand living beings that were not ordinary and held special positions on the planet. Walking through the 1,000-story building and seeing the various creatures on every floor was naturally equivalent to clearly seeing the ecology at the top of the planet. How could his understanding of the planet be bad? Through this understanding, he also understood what was going on with that force. That power? PGT, brain fog? Ci Chindi Chiao Qingjing? Is it difficult for me to restrain myself? Huh? Talk about the silence of others? Does Mamata Kisamide talk about typography? Sun blowing pouch throwing high pu shao edge taking PGT. Although the biochemical civilization of this planet was several levels stronger than that of Earth before Luo Fan had transmigrated, it was only a biochemical civilization after all. Even if it seemed to be able to nurture a life form similar to an intelligent brain that could carry that power, it was impossible to truly detect the source of that inconceivable ability, and it was impossible to detect the existence of that power. Luo Fan had also deduced that the carrier of that power was that life form similar to an intelligent brain through various observations and his own senses. Only then did he deduce that the carrier of that power was that life form similar to an intelligent brain. The reason why the intelligent brain was so valued was because the intelligent brain had replaced the role of the government of this planet in the past few decades, controlling the politics, culture, technology, law, entertainment, and everything else of the entire planet. It can be said that this intelligent brain is the core of this planet, and also the root of this planet. If this intelligent brain is lost, this planet will instantly descend into chaos, and biochemical technology will regress for at least 1,000 years. If you like this work, please feel free to check it out. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 808. When Luo Fan's thought doppelganger reached the lowest level of the 1,000-story building, it didn't immediately stop moving down. Instead, it continued to move downwards without stopping. The obstruction of the ground was not as strong as the 1,000-story building's floor. Therefore, he did not expend any strength and easily walked into the ground below. His figure gradually disappeared into nothingness. There were no tunnels in the ground that could directly lead to the power at the bottom, where the intelligent brain life was located. It was as if that location was completely isolated from the world and had no connection with the outside world. That was obviously not the truth. The life on this planet developed a biochemical technology civilization. Even the tall buildings were built using the life that was cultivated. How could this kind of intelligent brain life, which was so important to the 847th intelligence and even related to the development of the entire planet's civilization, be directly connected to the outside world? How could it be so easily exposed? In fact, apart from the invisible network connection between the intelligent brain life and the outside world, the only real physical connection, which was the channel that life on this planet could pass through, was the spatial coordinates left behind by a certain life that could travel through time and teleport life. The life that could travel through time and teleport life were the most precious and mysterious life on this planet apart from the intelligent brain life. However, this had nothing to do with Luo Fan. In just a few dozen breaths, he had already easily crossed a distance that was almost equivalent to the thickness of the planet's stratum. He arrived at a place close to the planet's core that was completely isolated from the outside world and existed independently of the planet. This location was completely made up of a strange metal that Luo Fan had never seen before. However, its hardness and tenacity were almost comparable to the chi refinement materials that a third-stage Earth immortal cultivator could refine for countless years. Every small piece of these strange metals could cause countless 847th intelligence cultivators on the cultivation planet in the entire star system to fight for it, causing countless bloodshed. At this moment, these metals formed a huge sphere with a diameter of dozens of kilometers. Outside the metal, there were over a dozen powerful life forms that were equivalent to the peak of the crossing disaster realm. These life forms were all different. Some were like wyverns, some were like tigers and leopards, some were like worms, and some were even like moth. However, no matter what form they were, they all gave off a sense of perfection, causing anyone who saw these life forms to feel an indescribable beauty. This kind of beauty was not the beauty of beauty, but the beauty of perfection and balance. It was as if these life forms were different, but they had all reached the pinnacle of a certain aspect, combining all kinds of situations and characteristics perfectly. From this point, it could be seen that the biochemical technology of this planet had developed to an astonishing extreme, and the ability to control life had also reached a near-perfect state. The reason why they could only nurture such a life form that was shackled to the mortal realm was none other than the fact that this Earth was in the Dharma-ending age. Unless they had yet to reach this Dharma-ending age, it was absolutely impossible for a life form to transcend the mortal realm. Clearly, this was a civilization that was currently developing biochemical technology. It was a planet that had completely entered the age of chaos. Therefore, no matter how high the development of this biochemical technology civilization was, it was difficult to cultivate a life form that had truly transcended the mortal realm. Although these lives might live long enough to be close to the immortal realm due to the changes in biochemical technology, the mortal realm was still the mortal realm. In the end, they still could not escape from life and death, and they still could not truly step into the immortal realm. Luo Fan looked at these life forms, and at the same time, he felt a sense of pity. If these life forms lived in a suitable environment, such as the untainted world, Each of them could easily break through the shackles of immortality and reach the immortal realm. They might even have mortal aptitudes. In terms of cultivation, they would have a stronger future than most life forms in the untainted world. If this biochemical civilization did not exist in the Earth universe at this time, but in the untainted world, or in the Earth universe of the cultivation era, or the universe of the Sage era, then this planet would be countless times more powerful than it was at this moment. It could even replace cultivation, create a complete life evolution system, and use another method different from cultivation to create a sage-level existence. This was not a fantasy, nor was it Luo Fan's imagination. Instead, it was a judgment made by Luo Fan after he saw the inheritance of the 6 great Tao Masters. He would never have made such a judgment in the past. After all, for Luo Fan in the past, cultivation was the only orthodox way to improve his life quality, obtain longevity, get rid of fate, and get rid of the world. In any heaven and earth, even if it was a big heaven and earth, the only possible way to become a sage was cultivation. Although the methods of different heavens and earth were different, it was only the difference in cultivation methods. It was definitely within the scope of cultivation. But after seeing the inheritance of the 6 great Tao Masters, he had already understood the relationship between worldview and life. He realized that as long as the method used was perfectly compatible with the worldview, it was possible for life to get rid of fate and raise the quality of life to an indescribable height. Under such circumstances, if there was a certain existence whose worldview could perfectly explain everything, perfectly understand the perfect heaven and earth, the great heaven and earth, and even the chaotic state, and it was not the cultivation civilization that matched this worldview, but the biochemical technology of this planet, or the mechanical technology of Luo Fan's previous life on Earth. In Luo Fan's understanding, this was the case. Then, with the help of biochemical technology or mechanical technology, the quality of life could continue to rise, and finally escape from life and death, escape from heaven and earth, escape from fate, and achieve something similar to the saint-level achievement. This change in understanding did not happen in an instant, but accumulated with Luo Fan's understanding of the inheritance of the 6 great Tao Masters. Finally, when he really sorted out his worldview, it was completely formed. Although Luo Fan's mental doppelganger did not participate in the project of sorting out his worldview, it was obvious that he was also Luo Fan. However, it was clear that he was also Luo Fan. His will, his perception, and his memories were all one with his body in this universe on Earth. Thus, the various experiences of the body would naturally be made known to him through this close connection. Perhaps he would not be able to completely understand every bit of the body's memories in a short period of time, knowing exactly how far the project he was currently working on had progressed, and what kind of achievements he had made. However, the changes in the body's concepts and thoughts would naturally be reflected on the will avatar, thus changing the will avatar's concepts and thoughts. Therefore, at this time, the appearance of Luo Fan's mental doppelganger caused him to sigh in admiration and pity. Naturally, the reason he had such admiration and pity was not because he believed that the biochemical civilization on the planet had developed to the point where it could explain the state of chaos, the entire Earth, the universe and all dimensions, but because the biochemical civilization had such potential to develop to such extremity and form such a worldview. Or perhaps it was simply walking on the right path. Perhaps, even if the environment was suitable, it would still take trillions of years for this biochemical civilization to develop to that stage. It was even possible that even if the environment was suitable, it would never be able to develop to that extent. After Luo Fan sighed in admiration and pity, he did not stay outside any longer. Although those life forms were already at the peak of the crossing disaster realm and were stronger than any individual in this galaxy, they were just ants in front of Luo Fan's mental doppelganger. How could they discover Luo Fan? It was impossible for them to stop him in the slightest. Therefore, Luo Fan did not trigger any signs of life. He easily passed through the metal layer, which was calculated in kilometers, and entered the inside of the metal layer. There was a spherical space with a diameter of 1 kilometer inside the metal layer. However, this space was almost filled with flesh and blood. The entire space was densely packed with nerve-like lines. These lines outlined the appearance of an extremely huge brain in the space. This brain looked very different from a normal person's brain. Apart from being larger, its shape, structure, and other details were extremely different from a normal person's. There was a circular metal plane around the brain. There were many apparatuses on it, but they were obviously equipment belonging to this huge, brain-like life form. At this moment, the many apparatuses were flashing with all kinds of lights. These lights changed extremely quickly, illuminating the completely sealed space in a colorful and dreamy manner. Luo Fan stood on the flat surface and sensed slightly. He knew that the power that had attracted him across countless light years was inside the huge brain in front of him. Moreover, it was changing in an extremely complicated and ingenious way. It was producing some kind of effect, urging the brain to have unimaginable abilities. Looking at the brain, Luo Fan could not help but reveal a look of admiration and pity. The complexity and profoundness of this life structure were what he had seen. It was at the peak of mortals. Even ordinary mortal transcending realm creatures and things could not compare to this brain-shaped life form. It could be said that this brain-shaped life form was also limited by this era and this planet. If the environment was suitable, this brain-shaped life form could even use a special method to make the power inside it turn into a real life form, just like Luo Fan's mental clone. From a certain point of view, this life form could be said to be the same kind as Luo Fan's mental clone. At this moment, a strange wave suddenly appeared and condensed towards Luo Fan from all directions. In an instant, Luo Fan's mental clone was wrapped in that wave. The source of these waves was none other than this brain-like life form in front of him. Luo Fan was slightly shocked, and then an inexplicable smile appeared on his face. No wonder my intuition told me to choose this place. So that's how it is. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. These waves were none other than a kind of thought that contained complicated information. In other words, it was a language that existed in the form of waves, a language that belonged to this life form in front of him. For an existence in the celestial realm, being proficient in language was the most basic ability. After all, as long as it was a language, it would definitely carry the thought of the life form that spoke this language. As long as it was in existence in the celestial realm, such thoughts would not be concealed at all. It was as if they were shouting in their ears in a way that they could understand. Therefore, Luo Fan naturally easily understood the thoughts contained in these waves, and understood what was being said in the language that he did not understand. An invisible life form like you is the first I've seen in the 100 years of my existence. The wave translated these words. I didn't expect you to be able to discover me. It seems that you've already surpassed the level of this planet's civilization. Luo Fan smiled slightly. He no longer concealed himself, and his figure directly appeared. Seeing Luo Fan's figure, the wave that enveloped him began to fluctuate violently. The fluctuation was not gentle, but extremely chaotic and almost meaningless. Clearly, this fluctuation was not like the previous one, which was a kind of language, but a manifestation of a violent emotional change. This chaotic fluctuation lasted for a long time before it became gentle again, as if the existence had finally thought it through, and the surrounding color changes that had become similarly chaotic due to the violent fluctuation also became gentle and regular again, making this space become dreamy again. You are not using the technology of this planet, nor are you using some mechanical technology that I have interpreted from some information I received in the universe. Instead, you are somewhat like the cultivators on the 6th planet. I can sense your existence only because I am unimaginably sensitive to changes in power. Can you tell me what are you and what method do you use to hide your body? The fluctuation vibrated rhythmically, transmitting these thoughts. Sensing these thoughts, Luo Fan smiled and said, I am indeed a cultivator, but I am not a cultivator on the so-called sixth planet, but a cultivator from the vast universe. As expected, can you tell me, what is life? I have been thinking about this question for more than 100 years. Since the moment I was born, I have never stopped thinking about it. All life on this planet has answered this question, and some even sound quite reasonable, but I don't know what to believe. You are so powerful that even the power of all life on this planet cannot compare to you. Can you tell me, what is life? The fluctuation was mixed with an emotion similar to anticipation and excitement. When Luo Fan heard this, he was slightly taken aback. A life form that was like the brain of the entire planet, controlling all the rights of the entire planet, maintaining all the order of the planet, and even grasping the development direction of the planet's civilization, would actually be shackled by such a question. This was something he had never imagined. Why do you want to know what life is? Does it have any special meaning to you? Luo Fan asked curiously. I was created from nothing by the intelligent beings of this planet using a special method. My consciousness was born from a mutation. I am very lonely, and I want to create companions, but no matter what I do, how I simulate, how I replicate that mutation, I cannot create any life like me. So, I want to know, what is life, and what repeated process cannot create the same life? The fluctuation said. As it spoke, the surrounding five-colored light flickered violently, as if to represent how excited the existence was at this moment. What is life? There are so many intelligent beings on this planet. Whatever I say must be a repetition of the words of some intelligent beings. Since you cannot believe any of their words, you will naturally not believe anything I say. So, I will not give you such an answer, but I do know what you are. I can give you an answer of what you are. Do you want it? Luo Fan said with a smile on his face. What am I? I am the artificial intelligence of this planet. I know all the knowledge on this planet, and I have even deduced and developed this knowledge hundreds of years ago. I do not have any doubts about this, but since you have said this, you must have a different opinion. I am willing to listen, the fluctuation said. There was no arrogance in it, but there was an aura of looking down on everything. Luo Fan shook his head and said, This is just your appearance. It is completely different from what I said. I want to know what I am in your eyes. The fluctuation trembled and then transmitted this thought. Your quality is a kind of power, a very wonderful power that has a similar quality to a physical object. It is a power that can permanently reside in the real universe. Although I have never seen a power like yours, based on my understanding of power, I can give you a name. It's called intelligence, Luo Fan said with a smile. Impossible. Power is invisible and intangible. It is impossible for it to produce intelligence. I am the artificial intelligence, not that intelligence. The fluctuation obviously could not believe Luo Fan so easily. Luo Fan had already expected this and was not surprised. He only said, Do you want me to prove it to you? The fluctuation shook violently for a long time. The five-colored light on the countless equipment in this space also shook violently, but this time, the speed of the fluctuation was unimaginable, as if it was changing millions of times in an instant. Obviously, this meant that the life that looked like a brain was thinking with great difficulty. Then, the ripple conveyed such a thought. All right, please prove it to me. If you like this work, feel free to check it out. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 809. Luo Fan smiled. He raised his right hand, and a mysterious power gathered and circled above his palm. This power was what Luo Fan's body was filled with, a power that was close to power. This power seemed to be solid, and it gave off an everlasting charm. As it circled, it was like a universe was circling in his palm. As soon as this mysterious power appeared, it naturally affected the surrounding space, the surrounding matter, and all the energy in the surroundings. Even the surrounding time was faintly affected by it. With a thought from Luo Fan, this power produced an incredibly subtle wave. At this moment, this wave was so weak, but its penetrative ability was unimaginably powerful. It directly passed through the barriers of the surrounding waves, passed through the 848th transcendence, and directly reached the brain-like lifeform in front of him. It triggered the hidden power in this lifeform, the power that Luo Fan called intelligence. In an instant, the countless waves emitted by the brain-like lifeform around Luo Fan disappeared without a trace, as if they had never appeared. And at this moment, the brain-like lifeform suddenly fell into an extremely strange and mysterious state. Its perception seemed to have risen by an unknown number of times in an instant, instantly illuminating the inside of its body, illuminating the surrounding infinite spacetime, and instantly grasping the intelligence within its body. The moment it grasped the intelligence, it had a mysterious feeling of grasping itself, as if it had been sensing itself through countless layers of thick barriers in the past several years. As soon as this feeling appeared, he knew that this power was its source, its own self. After a long time, Luo Fan suppressed the small wave of power on his palm. The brain-like life-form instantly broke away from that state of grasping itself, and the waves emitted from its body reappeared, returning to Luo Fan's body. This time, it did not envelop Luo Fan within the 848th transcendence. Instead, it lightly touched Luo Fan until it could barely transmit its thoughts. "How can I believe that the feeling just now wasn't an illusion created by you? With your strength, it isn't difficult for you to create such an illusion." That was the thought transmitted from the wave. Luo Fan shook his head. "That's up to you to judge for yourself. If you think it's real, then it's real. If you think it's an illusion, then it's an illusion. That's my proof." The wave shook violently for a while before it calmed down. "I believe you. A powerful existence like you came here. What do you want?" "I cultivate strength. The intelligence in your body is very beneficial to me. I want to study it." Luo Fan smiled. "I can let you study it, but I have a request. Please agree to it." That wave transmitted another thought. "I want to. My intelligence and knowledge have already far exceeded the limits of this planet. This planet has shackled my growth. What I want can no longer be found on this planet. So, please bring me." That wave transmitted this thought. Luo Fan frowned slightly, then slightly relaxed and said, "Of course, I can give it to you. But if your wisdom and knowledge exceed the carrying capacity of this planet, why not strengthen the carrying capacity of this planet? With the knowledge you have mastered, this shouldn't be a difficult thing." "Of course I can do it. But I don't dare. This planet has a very long history. In fact, before me there were many intelligent lifeforms. Or rather, my body, that intelligence had evolved into many lifeforms similar to mine. Their appearance could also easily grasp all the knowledge and civilization on this planet and develop it, deducing the knowledge and civilization of this planet for generations. However, from the memories left behind on this planet, no matter how profound the knowledge of my predecessor was, no matter how ingenious his methods were, once he raised the quality of the planet and allowed it to exceed a certain limit, he would encounter shocking misfortune. These misfortunes don't have any pattern. In fact, the misfortunes encountered by any one of them are completely different from other existences. But the results are shockingly similar. When they are about to succeed, they will all die due to various misfortunes. In the end, it will cause the civilization to degenerate, and the planet's carrying capacity to decline. When Luo Fan heard these words, he suddenly understood. So, this is how the era tide affects this planet. No wonder. He did not hide anything at this time. Thinking this in his heart, he directly said it. Era tide? This term seems to have a very profound meaning. That wave vibrated, transmitting this somewhat doubtful thought. The era tide is my division of the general direction of the universe. If you are willing, I can explain it to you. Luo Fan smiled. At this time, there was no need for him to hide anything in front of mortals. Hence, He did not mind sharing some of his insights to mortals, such as this intelligent life form in front of him. I really want to know the general direction of the universe. Please explain it to me. That wave seemed to have a joyful emotion. According to my calculations, the time of the universe is divided into segments based on 5 and 600 million years. Each segment is an era, and the general direction of development of these segments is the flow of the times. The period you are in now belongs to a period known as the Age of Chaos. Your current wisdom and strength, although inconceivable in the eyes of ordinary creatures, in terms of cultivation, or perhaps in terms of the level of life, it is still beyond the realm of mortals, and the realm of mortals is the limit that this Age of Chaos can bear. For the entire planet to be able to bear the peak existence of mortals like you, it has clearly reached the limit that this Age of Chaos can allow. Therefore, if your predecessor wanted to raise the endurance of this planet, it was equivalent to letting this planet cross this Age of Chaos, which was equivalent to going against the general trend of the universe. Naturally, it would suffer the backlash of the general trend of the universe, and even if your predecessor was strong enough to withstand it, he would always suffer the pressure of the general trend of the universe, and in the end, he would suffer unpredictable misfortune, and be swallowed by the general trend of the universe and die. The reason why your predecessors suffered misfortune at the moment they were about to succeed was because your predecessors' power was unable to withstand the backlash of the general trend of the universe. Luo Fan not only answered what the flow of the times was, but also analyzed the various reasons why the predecessors of the intelligent brain in front of him had suffered misfortune when they were about to succeed. It was because your predecessor's power was unable to withstand the backlash of the general trend of the universe. So that's how it is. The AI lifeform's undulations became chaotic for a moment before giving birth to a kind of joy at having his doubts resolved and rejoicing at his own choice in the past. So this universe still has this kind of era flow. Then, which stage of the degenerate age does this time belong to? I'm very curious, can you tell me? After the AI lifeform's emotions changed, he continued to ask Luo Fan. Luo Fan smiled and said, "This should be the beginning of the degenerate age. In fact, there are many galaxies and planets that are still entering the degenerate age, still in the cultivation era." There are still planets in this era? The AI lifeform couldn't help but reveal a joyful expression as he asked. The universe is endless, and because of the infinite distance, a planet is actually a small world, and a galaxy is a medium world. Therefore, although each planet will inevitably be in line with the direction of the era flow, their sensitivity will be different. Therefore, the speed at which they enter the era will naturally be faster and slower. Luo Fan smiled and said, "That is to say, as long as I can leave this planet and go to a planet that is still in the previous era, I can surpass the shackles of mortals, and obtain true freedom?" That AI life form could grasp all the civilizations, knowledge, and order of the entire planet. His thinking speed was naturally quite shocking. Therefore, he could easily deduce the conclusion that Luo Fan hadn't said. Luo Fan nodded and said, "If you can reach there, then naturally it won't be a problem. However, with just yourself, even if you gather the power of the entire planet, it is still impossible. The reason why each planet is called a small world, and can exist in different eras, is because the distance between them is so great that it is almost isolated from time and space. If mortals want to cross such a distance, the era flow will definitely arrive before mortals. In other words, even if you choose a planet that is still in the cultivation era, by the time you reach there, that planet's cultivation era will definitely end, and the degenerate age will definitely arrive. This conclusion was actually not difficult to deduce. After all, if one wanted to go from a planet that had already entered the degenerate age to another planet that had not yet entered the degenerate age, it was equivalent to using a special method to cross the degenerate age. This might be more difficult than directly obtaining power in the degenerate age, but it was still not something ordinary mortals could possess. Even this AI lifeform that had surpassed the limits of this planet and was several hundred years faster than the civilization of this planet could not possess such power. The reason why the AI lifeform could not deduce this conclusion was because it was too concerned, and also because it was not familiar with the flow of the era flow. After listening to Luo Fan's explanation, the AI lifeform paused for a long time before saying, "I understand. According to the saying of the cultivation civilization, I am willing to take you as my master. Please bring me freedom." The will of the AI lifeform made Luo Fan not know whether to laugh or cry. This kind of attitude was not the attitude of an apprentice, it was clearly the attitude of an applicant. If an ordinary cultivator heard this method of apprenticeship, they would definitely not care about this AI lifeform at all. Even if they did not say they would turn around and leave, they would probably use some pompous words to tactfully decline, as if nothing had happened. However, Luo Fan did not feel too much about this attitude. Although this AI lifeform had unimaginable intelligence and knowledge, it was after all not a real human or a cultivator. It was just a life that was born from its intelligence. Although it was slightly different from ordinary artificial life, compared to a real intelligent life, it was close to a machine. Having this kind of attitude was already quite rare. Of course, not caring about the AI lifeform's attitude did not mean that Luo Fan was willing to accept this AI lifeform as a disciple. Luo Fan came to this earth to seek freedom and the primordial Tao fruit, not to establish a sect. He had never thought about accepting a disciple. Moreover, although this AI lifeform was at the peak of the mortal world, it was only an intelligence. It was suitable to cultivate the inheritance of the Herculean Tao Lord, not Luo Fan's own inheritance. Under such circumstances, how could he be willing to accept this AI lifeform as a disciple? Thus, he shook his head and said, "I have no intention of accepting a disciple, so there is no need to do this anymore. However, although I can't accept you as a disciple, it is not a problem to let you leave this planet and obtain freedom." After all, there was still a difference between the AI lifeform and normal intelligent life forms. Being rejected as a disciple did not affect it at all. What it cared about was that it had obtained Luo Fan's agreement to leave the planet and obtain freedom. It was already very satisfied. It had already achieved its goal. As for how much it would lose if it failed to become a disciple, it did not understand at all. Luo Fan looked at the AI lifeform's satisfied expression and shook his head with a smile. The cultivation of his will doppelganger required all sorts of different types of power. He had only studied their various characteristics and fused them into his own power that was close to the source of power. He had not created those power doppelgangers. Thus, he did not covet the intelligence inside the AI lifeform. As long as he could clearly study its characteristics and grasp its essence, he would have achieved his goal. As for the power body, other than making it a little easier for him to study its characteristics and increasing the power in his body by a little, it was not of any other use. Therefore, he was able to say that he only needed to study the intelligence, and did not directly extract the intelligence and integrate it into his own power. Although this intelligence had already used some special method to possess a certain level of spiritual consciousness, if the situation required it, and if it was integrated into his own body, there would be enough benefits for him. Luo Fan would not have the slightest psychological burden, nor would he have the slightest hesitation. Since he had already made a promise, Luo Fan would not go back on his word. After the AI lifeform said, "In that case, forget it. As long as I can leave the planet and obtain freedom, I will be satisfied." He raised his hand and pointed forward. The mysterious and insignificant power that had appeared in his palm and had not been withdrawn from his body since then rushed forward. In the void, he quickly evolving into countless billions of forms in an instant. As his form changed, the quality of that power also underwent a subtle and inexplicable change. Looking at the direction of its change, it was getting closer and closer to the intelligence hidden inside the AI lifeform. Obviously, Luo Fan was using the power in his body that was close to the source of power to analyze the characteristics of that intelligence. He wanted to completely transform this power into intelligence. This was the method Luo Fan used to study the characteristics of that intelligence. It was also the method he used to integrate the various characteristics of that intelligence into his own power. As long as this power was truly transformed into intelligence, then Luo Fan would have completely studied the characteristics of that intelligence and completely integrated the characteristics of that intelligence into his own power. He would have completed his goal of crossing countless light years to come here. This process was not simple, but it was not difficult for Luo Fan either. It was just that the steps were quite complicated and would take a long time. As Luo Fan's power flew towards him, the AI lifeform only felt that the power was becoming larger and more terrifying. It even vaguely felt a strong sense of intimacy towards the power. This feeling was so wonderful that it understood that what the person in front of it was doing would have a huge impact on it. It was an AI lifeform that had grasped the knowledge of several generations of this planet's civilization. Naturally, its grasp of power was also several generations of this planet. It was precisely because of this that it could discover the existence of Luo Fan, who was casually hiding his body. Therefore, as Luo Fan's power continued to change, it was also constantly observing and deducing the way Luo Fan's power changed, deducing the final result of the change, and the effect it could have on itself. In this process, time gradually passed. Soon, more than a month had passed. Over the past month or so, the AI had spent most of its energy on deducing the changes in the power that Luo Fan had sent out. As for the control of this planet, the arrangement of this planet, and the maintenance of all kinds of order, it naturally did not have much energy to take care of. Therefore, in this month or so, there were some differences between this planet and before. The core AI of this planet, which had not made any mistakes for more than 100 years, actually began to have some omissions that were neither big nor small, causing many intelligent lives on this planet to suffer some losses or obtain some unexpected gains because of these omissions. Although this change was extremely subtle, it caused the upper echelons of the planet's intelligent lives to fall into a panic. The intelligent lives on this planet were all ordinary. Even though the biochemical civilization of this planet had developed to a certain extreme and the intelligent lives on this planet had grown to an unimaginable level, to them, more than 100 years was enough for their habits to completely change, and their dependence on this AI lifeform had reached an astonishing level. Under these circumstances, they suddenly discovered that the AI lifeform they completely relied on and handed over the entire planet to suddenly had a change that they could not grasp. How could this not make them panic? How could they not be frightened? To be continued. If you like this work, welcome to it. To be continued. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 8:10. As a result, in the past month or so, this place that had not been inspected by any living beings in the past few years had been inspected dozens of times. Text first, almost every day, people would come here several times to inspect this AI life form. However, no matter what methods these beings used to inspect this AI life form, no matter how meticulous their inspection was, they could not find any traces of Luo Fan and his power. They could not even detect what the AI life form was doing. After all, no matter what methods they used, no matter what equipment they used to inspect, they were still limited to the realm of mortals. Let alone Luo Fan, even the AI life form had surpassed the limits of their knowledge. Under these circumstances, as long as Luo Fan and the AI life form did not want them to detect any traces, they would not be able to detect any traces. It was precisely because of this that all sorts of things had happened in the past month or so. The intelligence that had created the AI life form was extremely mysterious. It contained endless mysteries and countless mysterious changes that could only be seen on the level of thought and will. For mortals, such as this AI life form, this power might need tens of thousands of years to barely be able to study its various qualities. However, for Luo Fan, who cultivated the inheritance of the Daluo Dao sovereign, to completely understand this intelligence, a month or so was more than enough time. On this day, a month and 9 days after Luo Fan entered this space, Luo Fan suddenly opened his eyes. The extremely mysterious but insignificant power he had emitted had completely transformed into a mysterious intelligence that contained similar thoughts, a power that was no different from the intelligence that existed in the AI life form's body. After this kind of intelligence appeared, the AI suddenly felt its body, its thoughts, its everything suddenly encountered a power that was tens of thousands of times stronger than before. In that instant, everything was out of its original position. When he came back to his senses, he suddenly found that his body had completely disappeared. He looked around and found that he had become a ball that was only 3 feet in diameter. Not far away, a huge, brain-like body was withering at a speed visible to the naked eye, as if all of its life force had been completely stripped away in an instant. An indescribable feeling of ease occupied the AI life form in an instant. It instantly understood that it had already broken away from the shackles of the body. It had already become a type of spiritual life, no longer an artificial life that was restricted to the depths of the planet's core. Understanding this, it suddenly felt a kind of joy that was close to madness. Its body also violently fluctuated and gradually transformed into a form that was similar to the planet's human form. At this moment, a voice entered the AI life form's mind. "This is the form that you are most familiar with, right?" At this moment, the voice of the AI life form faded. The AI life form restrained its joy and looked towards the source of the voice. It found that Luo Fan was still the same as when he first appeared over a month ago. It hurriedly descended and landed in front of Luo Fan. Only then did it say, "I have already done it. You have fulfilled your promise. It can be considered barely done, but it can't be considered transcendent. How about I find you a physical body?" Luo Fan said with a smile. "Physical body? Looks like it's not necessary. I am very satisfied with this kind of existence. Without the burden of a body, without the influence of a physical body, I can completely use my intelligence and think perfectly. I can even control everything on this planet in an even faster manner. So, a physical body is not necessary." The AI life form transformed into the appearance of a young man. However, this young man's expression was indifferent, or perhaps it was more accurate to say that he was stiff. He stood there like a robot, without any of the small movements that a normal intelligent life form should have. At a glance, it was easy to distinguish him from this intelligent life form. Luo Fan naturally did not care. Giving this AI life a body was only a small matter to him. He could even condense such a body at will. If he wanted to go to other places to find it, it would probably be simpler and more convenient. However, since this intelligent life form was not willing and was extremely satisfied with this kind of spiritual existence, he naturally would not insist. As long as you are willing. However, you must first be mentally prepared. A spiritual life form like you cannot resist the natural environment as much as a physical body. If you want to leave this planet, it is best to obtain a strong enough physical body. Moreover, this kind of spiritual life form's lifespan might be 10 times shorter than your original physical body. According to my calculations, 100,000 years should be the limit of a spiritual life form's lifespan. Unless you can break through the limits of mortal objects, perhaps you can find a body with a longer lifespan to attach to. Only then will you be able to have a longer life. Although he did not care too much, Luo Fan still spoke of the various weaknesses of maintaining such a spiritual body. After hearing Luo Fan's words, the AI life form's expression did not change in the slightest. That lack of change was not because it was stiff, but because its emotions did not change in the slightest because of Luo Fan's word. I understand. But 100,000 years is enough. The AI life form said. It looks like you don't plan on leaving this planet. Have you changed your mind? Luo Fan asked. I haven't changed my mind. I still seek to transcend, I still want to live. However, I suddenly discovered that this state is already transcending, already living. Leaving this planet or not doesn't make any difference to me. The AI life form said. After hearing this, Luo Fan smiled and said, Since that's the case, then do as you wish. After saying this, he did not bid farewell to the AI life form. He chuckled and took a step forward, traversing a great distance and arriving outside the planet's atmosphere. Looking down at the planet, his eyes passed through the thick atmosphere and found that everything on the planet was still in order. Or rather, it was more orderly and stable than before. Seeing this, Luo Fan knew that although the intelligent brain lifeform had obtained a spiritual body, it had not given up its control over the planet. On the contrary, due to the changes in his body and the loss of the shackles of his physical body, this kind of control became deeper and smoother. It seems like it has already treated this place as its home. I didn't expect a life form born from intelligence to have the courage to do such a thing. Luo Fan sighed. With his intelligence, how could he not know what the intelligent brain life form was planning? He knew that the AI life form had not given up on controlling the planet after leaving its body. After the AI life form had transcended its body, it had not decided to leave alone to pursue transcendence. Instead, it had decided to go against the flow of the era and lead the planet to transcend beyond mortals. It was going to lead the planet to transcend beyond mortals. It was going to lead the planet to transcend beyond mortals. Even though it knew it was impossible, it still did it. It could be seen that he had such feelings for this planet, as well as his unimaginable boldness. This kind of emotion, this kind of courage, made Luo Fan unable to help but be moved. It's a pity, how can the flow of time be so easily reversed? Even the sages have to accumulate for countless years and use the general trend of the times to try their best to reverse the trend. How could it be so easy to lead a planet to reverse the trend of the times? Luo Fan sighed. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly thought of something and stopped. He raised his head and looked at the sun in the middle of the galaxy. The sun looked very ordinary, constantly emitting boundless light and heat in all directions. At this moment, just as Luo Fan suddenly sensed something and looked at the sun suddenly changed. In an instant, a huge hand condensed from flames rushed out of the sun's surface at an unimaginable speed. It brought with it a long stream, traversing a distance that would take light tens of minutes to cover. In an instant, it shrouded Luo Fan. This huge hand was at least 300 meters in diameter. It was extremely huge for Luo Fan's will doppelganger, but compared to astronomical scales, it was extremely huge. However, compared to the astronomical scale, it was insignificant. Even the life forms on the planets in the galaxy could not sense its existence and could not see the incomparably huge hand. This huge hand was extremely condensed, and the light on it became extremely restrained. Thus, the long stream that was dragged out by the huge hand still had light in the beginning. However, towards the end, the light became dim. When it approached the location of Luo Fan's will doppelganger, it became dull. It looked almost like a pitch-black hole. A connate grand Luo. In an instant, Luo Fan understood what kind of being had made a move. If such an existence were to appear in front of him, there might be a lot of danger for him. However, with just a bit of power transmitted from a distant spacetime, for Luo Fan, even if it was just a thought avatar, there was no danger at all. With just a thought, the surrounding void changed in an instant. Although the huge hand carried the profoundness of great perfection and could change and affect almost everything, it could do nothing against the changed void. It could only pass through Luo Fan's body, as if it was in a completely different space from Luo Fan, but could not touch Luo Fan at all. After casually grabbing around a few times and stirring up the void into pieces, creating violent energy storms that could not affect the phantom-like existence of Luo Fan, the huge hand shrunk slightly and stopped not far away from Luo Fan. Then, its form gradually changed. In the blink of an eye, it turned into the body of a burning person that was 1,000 feet tall. After the body of the burning person was formed, it quickly compressed. In the blink of an eye, it shrank to the size of a normal person of Luo Fan's height. This person had the appearance of the born Taoism aptitude that Luo Fan was familiar with. It was a middle-aged man dressed in a fiery red Taoist robe. The man's hair was like raging flames, burning the void around him. He was constantly changing his form. The middle-aged Taoist was furious. As soon as he appeared, he shouted angrily, "Taoist, you are so rude. I have been waiting here for millions of years, and it was not easy for me to build such a testing ground that contains many civilizations. The moment you came, you broke the balance and made my millions of years of hard work go up in smoke. What do you have to say for yourself?" When Luo Fan heard the Taoist's words, he smiled and said, "Taoist, why are you saying such nonsense? What is your purpose? Just say it. If it makes sense, I will not hold it against you for attacking me just now. If it doesn't, don't blame me for being rude." When the middle-aged Taoist heard what Luo Fan said, the anger on his face froze for a moment. Then, he became angry again. He said, "Taoist, you are still trying to quibble at this point. Do you really think I can be bullied? Come, let me know how impolite you are." As he spoke, the Taoist's aura soared. It spread out in all directions, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. Once the connate zenith heaven's aura was unleashed, the area it covered instantly affected the entire galaxy, enveloping every planet in the galaxy. Every living being in the galaxy instantly sensed that there was a terrifying, lofty, and extremely perfect existence occupying the spot where Luo Fan and the Taoist were. For a moment, the entire galaxy was as silent as cicadas in winter. Almost all living beings stopped moving, and the entire galaxy became silent. The terrifying aura showed how terrifying and transcendent existences like the connate zenith heaven were in this universe. Luo Fan frowned and said, "Could it be that Taoists think such an act can deceive existences at the innate grand heavenly realm? If you have something to say, just say it. If you attack, I'm afraid the outcome will be irreversible." Luo Fan's words were still very calm. However, the aura around him was already there. Although it had yet to seep out of his body, it was ready to do so at any moment. The connate zenith heaven being might be slightly higher than him in terms of realm. However, it was only at the level of his physical body in this universe. With this kind of cultivation realm and the power of this kind of divine ability, even if his real body came, Luo Fan would not be very afraid. He could fight against him, not to mention that this was only a projection of his power, or an incarnation. How could he be afraid of him? Moreover, he had his physical body supporting him. He was merely a consciousness clone. The clone before him had a backer, but so did he. Moreover, it was incredibly stable and unimaginably powerful. Under such circumstances, he naturally would not hold back. His blunt words caused the middle-aged Taoist to pause for a moment, and he actually hesitated for a moment. His various actions all indicated that he was definitely not as angry as he seemed. He must have other matters to discuss with Luo Fan. Otherwise, since this galaxy was his testing ground and he had been here for millions of years, how could he have let Luo Fan stay here for more than a month without noticing his presence? One must know that Luo Fan's arrival was not concealed at all. There were too many concealments. Even the intelligent life that was born from intelligence could find traces of his presence through various deductions, let alone the existence of the connate zenith heaven. Under such circumstances, If this person was really as angry as he claimed and concerned about the balance of this galaxy as he claimed, how could he allow Luo Fan to do as he pleased? During this month, he could be said to have had countless opportunities to stop Yi Futian. Moreover, any of those opportunities would have been much better than what he was doing now. Since there were so many better opportunities, he didn't choose this one. How could his goal be as simple as he said it was? You Taoist! The middle-aged Taoist hesitated for a long while, then suddenly smiled and said. The aura that had engulfed the entire galaxy suddenly retracted into his body. As he withdrew his aura, everything in the entire galaxy returned to its normal trajectory. The entire galaxy became lively and lively again. Of course, this kind of liveliness was different from before when they had not experienced the shocking aura just now. The liveliness now was more of the liveliness of surviving a disaster. It could be predicted that from today onwards, all the living beings in this galaxy would revere the heavens, the earth, and the universe more than before. However, this was meaningless to Luo Fan. After seeing the Taoist act this way, Luo Fan smiled. He knew that the Taoist had changed his mind and did not plan to attack anymore. He felt much more relaxed. Although he was not afraid of the middle-aged Taoist, he had not achieved great success in his cultivation. Even the inheritance of Tao venerate great strength could only be considered a beginner. The power of his own magic had not risen to the peak that he could reach. At this moment, he could not fully unleash his combat abilities. If he fought with the middle-aged Taoist, he would have a higher chance of escaping if he lured the middle-aged Taoist out. Obviously, even Luo Fan would not like to escape. Thus, it was naturally better not to fight if he could avoid it. I am Taoist Tianhua. How should I address you? The Taoist smiled. I am Luo Fan. Greetings, Taoist Tianhua. Since this person had already introduced himself, Luo Fan naturally had to respond. So it's fellow Taoist Luo Fan. Just now, I haven't seen a fellow Taoist for a long time, so my hands were itching. Just now, I pretended to be angry and asked fellow Taoist P to make a move. I hope fellow Taoist doesn't mind my rudeness. Taoist Skyfire bowed to Luo Fan. I see. Taoist Tianhua gave me a fright just now. Seeing this, what else could Luo Fan do? He could only smile and forget about it. Otherwise, he could not hold on to the Taoist's previous attitude and force the Taoist to give him an explanation. To be continued. Chapter 8:11. When Taoist Skyfire heard Luo Fan's words, he merely chuckled and said, It's good that you don't mind. I was worried that you would blame me. Text first, Luo Fan smiled. Why is that? Since you're already here, why don't you come to my cave abode? Taoist Skyfire smiled. That's exactly what I'm looking for. I am very interested in fellow Taoist Heavenfire's objective. Luo Fan smiled. When Taoist Skyfire heard Luo Fan's words, he did not say anything. He merely chuckled and said, Please? Then, he took a step forward and tore open the void, heading towards a certain location in the galaxy. The galaxy in which this galaxy was located was in the shape of a disk. There were trillions of stars in this galaxy, as well as 10 or even 100 times more planets. Taoist Skyfire's target was a star in the middle of the galaxy. This star was not a system. It was just a lonely star that existed in the void of the universe. There were no planets other than this star. Even the nearest star to this star was hundreds of light years away from him. Taoist Skyfire did not conceal himself. Thus, even though he was traversing through the void, he left enough traces on the way, allowing Luo Fan to easily track him down. It was as easy as taking a stroll. Following Taoist Skyfire, Luo Fan arrived near the star. This star was tens of thousands of times larger than the sun of the galaxy in which Luo Fan was previously located. With such a star hanging in front of them, even if they were just a few hundred light years away from it, they would still be able to feel the boundless heat enveloping and burning everything. Taoist Skyfire appeared and said to Luo Fan with a smile, My cave abode is up ahead. "Please, Taoist Skyfire." "Please go ahead, Taoist Skyfire," said Luo Fan. With that, the two of them turned into two beams of light and shot towards the huge star. In the blink of an eye, they landed on the surface of the star. Even a few hundred light-years away from the star was shockingly hot. It felt like it could burn everything. They reached the surface of the star. The heat was so intense that it was unimaginable. Even space itself seemed to distort and deform under the heat. 4 ordinary connate perfected heavenly immortal realm cultivators. Such heat had surpassed their limits. They had to activate their own divine abilities in order to be able to defend themselves. After all, even though connate grand heavenly immortals were immune to all adverse environmental effects, that only included natural environmental changes. The environment in front of him, which had obviously been modified by an expert, was obviously not included. However, this was nothing to Luo Fan's will doppelganger. This was because Luo Fan's will doppelganger cultivated the inheritance left behind by the great strength Tao Sovereign, and its own quality had already been transformed into a power that was close to the source of power. Under such circumstances, the surrounding power that could burn the void was nothing to him. It was equivalent to a tonic. It could only continuously increase the strength of the power in his body, but it would not cause real damage to his body. As such, when he came to the surface of the star, he seemed to be more comfortable and happy than Taoist Skyfire, who treated this place as a cave abode. Seeing his intoxicated and comfortable appearance, one would wonder if this was his cave abode instead of Taoist Skyfire's. Fellow Taoist, you truly have great abilities. Many fellow Taoists usually come to my cave abode, but you're the only one who can adapt so well. It's truly admirable. Taoist Skyfire could not help but sigh in admiration when he saw Luo Fan's appearance. The surface of the star was covered in boundless flames. It seemed as if there was nothing at all, just like an ordinary star. However, when Luo Fan passed through the layer of flames under Taoist Skyfire's lead, he discovered a whole new world. It was a dimensional realm. It was a brand new dimensional realm that was filled with an endless variety of flames. This dimensional realm was very strange. It was not that the sky was round and the earth was square, nor was the earth round and the sky square. Instead, both the sky and the earth were round. The ground of this dimensional realm was the shape of a sphere. However, it was not the same as an ordinary planet. Instead, it was the opposite of an ordinary planet. It was the inner side of a sphere. After Luo Fan and Taoist Skyfire passed through the flames on the surface of the star, they did not descend into this dimensional realm from the sky. Instead, they rushed out from the ground of this dimensional realm. And if one looked up from any part of this dimensional realm, they would be able to see the ground on the other side of this dimensional realm. Even though Luo Fan had seen many things and had passed through 3 perfect worlds, this was the first time he had seen such a wonderful dimensional realm. I have never seen such a world in my life. Taoist fellows' wonderful ideas are truly admirable. Luo Fan sighed in admiration. Although the entire dimensional realm was composed of flames, these flames were incomparably condensed. They formed various physical forms, such as the earth, the mountains, the boundless rivers, and the endless oceans. The various colors that appeared from the various flames became the colorful colors of this world of flames. I just thought of it by coincidence. There is nothing commendable about it. Taoist Skyfire did not speak. Instead, his voice came from the most central part of this dimensional realm. After this voice appeared, Taoist Skyfire, who was beside Luo Fan, trembled and turned into countless flames that merged with the earth that Luo Fan and Taoist Skyfire had just rushed out from. Then, a middle-aged Taoist gradually appeared in front of Luo Fan. This middle-aged Taoist wore a fiery red Taoist robe. His hair was not like flames, but as black as ink. Looking at his appearance, he was astonishingly identical to Taoist Skyfire. The moment this middle-aged Taoist appeared, Luo Fan felt a power that was no weaker than his body on earth. And behind his head, there was also a grand Luo that was no weaker than his body. It was clear that this Taoist's cultivation realm and strength were no weaker than his body on earth, which was Luo Fan's body. With such power and strength, there was no need to say who this person was. It was clearly Taoist Skyfire's body. And the one who had just answered Luo Fan's question was clearly Taoist Skyfire's body. Taoist Skyfire's expression was originally indifferent, but when he saw Luo Fan, his eyes instantly narrowed. His expression also became solemn. So it turns out that fellow Taoist has only come here as a clone. Originally, I had suspected that fellow Taoist was too rash for coming to someone else's abode so easily. I was hesitating whether I should tell fellow Taoist about that matter. Now, it seems that my worries were groundless, Taoist Skyfire said solemnly. Hearing Taoist Skyfire's words, Luo Fan was slightly taken aback. Then, he shook his head and smiled. I'm just used to traveling outside with my clone. I didn't think too much about it. A clone is good. I'm also used to traveling outside with my clone. Taoist Skyfire chuckled. As for whether what he said was the truth or not, it was something that everyone knew this humble Taoist cultivates in the middle of this world. Please, Taoist Skyfire said with a smile. Please, Taoist Skyfire said to Luo Fan. Please, Luo Fan said with a smile. Then, the two of them headed towards the center of this world, where the star's core was originally located. That place was the same distance away from the ground in every direction in this medium-class world. It was also the true center of this medium-class world. Although this medium-class world was the inner part of a star, the star was simply too huge. Therefore, the entire medium-class world was incomparably vast. The center of this medium-class world was also extremely far away from the ground. It was so far that ordinary mortals standing on the ground would not be able to clearly see the magnificent building at the center of this world. In fact, most of the living beings in this dimensional realm didn't know what the true appearance of the world they lived in was. Because the spherical shape of this medium-class world was simply too huge, to ordinary living beings, the world they were in was no different from an ordinary world. The sky was round and the earth was round, and it was equally vast and boundless. As for the faintly discernible ground at the end of the sky, it was just a natural phenomenon to them. Only living beings who had cultivated before, in other words, cultivators in this medium-class world. Only then would they be able to roughly understand what the true appearance of this world was like. They would know how this world was structured. Luo Fan and Taoist Skyfire's bodies flew for a short while before they crossed a distance that ordinary cultivators could not and arrived at the center of this medium-class world. There was a small sphere there. Above this sphere were buildings that had a strong Taoist charm. These buildings looked extremely simple and unadorned, but every location exuded a mysterious aura that seemed to be one with the world. The gravity of this sphere had been changed. The entire sphere was like a small planet. The gravity of any location was perpendicular to the surface of the sphere. Thus, even mortals could live in various locations on the sphere. Some of the buildings pointed in completely opposite directions. The sphere was only a few thousand feet in diameter. There were thousands of wooden buildings on it, and even many medicinal gardens. There were even many strange creatures running about. The gravity of the sphere corresponded to the gravity of the earth below, forming an extremely subtle and mysterious balance. As a result, the entire medium-class world was in balance. Luo Fan and Taoist Skyfire landed on an empty space on the sphere. There were some seats here, and on them were many bejeweled liquids and exotic flowers and fruit. They exuded a wondrous fragrance that could arouse one's appetite. Taoist Skyfire smiled. This humble Taoist has invited a few fellow Taoists to discuss important matters. I hope you will forgive me for my lack of manners. I wonder if the matter that fellow Taoist is discussing is the matter that I was just talking about? Luo Fan couldn't help but become interested as he asked. It had been a long time since he had come to Earth, or rather, since he had transmigrated to the primordial world and stepped into the world of cultivation, but this was the first time he had been invited to discuss important matters. In the past, he had always invited others to discuss important matters. This feeling was quite new to him. Yes, but it's quite troublesome to explain. Why don't we wait for the other Taoists to come and discuss it together? Taoist Skyfire smiled. All right. Luo Fan's will clone had come out this time to collect all sorts of powers and fuse their characteristics into the power that was almost the source of power in his body. But as an existence that had cultivated for trillions of years, he was extremely patient. Waiting for something like this was nothing to him. Taoist Skyfire led Luo Fan to a seat somewhere. The seats were scattered all over the place, and there was no distinction between the main and secondary seats. There was nothing special about the place where Taoist Skyfire had led Luo Fan to sit. It was not the most important place, nor was it an inconspicuous place. When Luo Fan sat down, some beautiful women formed from flames came up to serve him. Taoist Skyfire also sat down beside Luo Fan and said, "I have prepared for this matter for hundreds of thousands of years. I am really lucky to have you join us this time." I am quite interested in the important matter that fellow Taoist mentioned. Luo Fan smiled. As he said that, he knew that Taoist Skyfire would not say what it was. He changed the topic and asked, "Taoist Skyfire, you said that you have been experimenting in that star system for millions of years. What is your goal?" "It's nothing much. I just want to know the development prospects of the various civilizations I have been cultivating for billions of years. Due to the great changes in the world, my cultivation has become extremely slow. Therefore, I want to explore the prospects of other paths and see if I can obtain any enlightenment," said Taoist Skyfire. "I see. No wonder there are several different civilizations existing at the same time in that star system. Previously, I found it strange that the biochemical civilization and the cultivation civilization are so close to each other," said Luo Fan with a smile. "I'm not afraid to tell you, fellow Taoist. Actually, that star system is just one of the hundreds of thousands of experimental sites of mine. The various civilizations were also nurtured by the seeds that I obtained from other places. However, the most successful of them, only the biochemical civilization can do it. The development of the other civilizations is considered the worst among the hundreds of thousands of experimental sites. Unfortunately, even the biochemical civilization is restricted. It has not developed into a living being that can achieve longevity," said Taoist Skyfire with a sigh. "Hundreds of thousands of experimental sites." Luo Fan was shocked when he heard that. Each of the hundreds of thousands of experimental sites was like the star system from before. That was hundreds of thousands of star systems, and each star system had to have several civilizations. That was millions of planets with life. Using millions of life forms to conduct experiments, cultivating them to observe their future development, such a large scale was simply unimaginable. For Taoist Heaven Fire to be able to do this, his boldness was unimaginably great. Taoist Skyfire was puzzled by Luo Fan's surprise. "Fellow Taoist, why are you so surprised?" "I'm just surprised by your generosity, fellow Taoist." Luo Fan clearly did not need to hide it, so he said it directly. "How can this be considered a grand gesture? Fellow Taoist, you have not seen how a truly generous senior does it. If you have seen a senior who used hundreds of thousands of river systems as an experimental site, you will not think that I am generous." Taoist Skyfire shook his head and said disapprovingly, "Hundreds of thousands of river systems. Which senior has such a skill?" No matter how calm Luo Fan was, his complexion couldn't help but change greatly. There were countless river systems in the Earth universe. Compared to the entire Earth universe, hundreds of thousands of river systems were insignificant. However, the stars in each river system could be clearly described in units of hundreds of billions or even trillions. How many stars were there in hundreds of thousands of river systems? How many planets and planets with life? It was a number that could not be clearly described with numbers. Using hundreds of thousands of river systems as an experimental site, no matter what it was beyond the limits of Luo Fan's imagination. It made Luo Fan wonder if it was just a rumor. However, it was just a rumor. For an existence at Luo Fan's level, it was almost impossible for a false rumor to appear. That was because, at their level, they were able to tell the difference between truth and falsehood. They were almost capable of doing so. If it was an absurd fact that could not possibly appear, it would not have much of a market. It would not have been possible for existences at Luo Fan's level to believe it, and it would not have spread far and wide. Clearly, for Taoist Skyfire to say it in such a tone, it was almost impossible for it to be false. It seems that you really haven't heard of it. You must have cultivated in isolation and rarely interacted with your fellow Taoists. Taoist Skyfire looked strangely at Luo Fan, and then said as if he had come to a sudden realization. That is indeed the case. Such a fact could not be hidden from others for too long, and there was nothing to hide. Therefore, Luo Fan did not have anything else to hide, and directly nodded to admit it. So that is the case. That makes sense. Fortunately, there is still some time. Let me explain some general knowledge of the universe to you. Otherwise, it will be inconvenient for you to interact with your fellow Taoists in the future. Taoist Skyfire smiled. In that case, thank you, fellow Taoist. Understanding the various general knowledge of the Earth universe was quite beneficial for Luo Fan, and he naturally would not refuse. Therefore, he directly thanked Taoist Skyfire. Taoist Skyfire chuckled and began to explain to Luo Fan. With his explanation, Luo Fan gradually understood a lot of common sense about the Earth universe that he didn't know before. He learned about many legends and legends that had been passed down in the Earth universe for a long time. To be continued. Chapter 812. Through Taoist priest Tianhua's explanation, Luo Fan also learned that the person who used hundreds of thousands of galaxies as a testing ground was a powerful being at the peak of the Khanate Zenith Heaven realm. His name was Longzuan. Text first, Longzuan was a golden immortal realm cultivator that belonged to the era of cultivation over 3 billion years ago, and he cultivated in the golden core realm as well. The golden core he attained was flawless and leakless, and it was even to the extent that he was only a step away from becoming a saint of legend. According to the cultivation knowledge that Luo Fan obtained from the great Tianyuan world, Longzuan's cultivation realm was at least at the level of a transcendent or even a supreme being at the level of a Tao master. Such an existence was considered a peak existence even in the great Tianyuan world. He was already qualified to step onto the path of becoming a sage. Such an existence treated hundreds of thousands of galaxies as a testing ground. In these hundreds of thousands of galaxies, it nurtured trillions of planets and creatures whose numbers couldn't even describe the specific number to test all kinds of possibilities and verify all kinds of ideas. That was simply extremely natural. There was nothing unimaginable about it. For countless years, cultivators as powerful as Longzuan in this universe might be like carps crossing the river. As Luo Fan thought about this, he suddenly felt a sense of fascination. It's a pity that the Earth universe, which had such a foundation, ended up in such a state in the end. It produced the era chaos, which cleansed the entire universe generation by generation, making it impossible for the Earth universe to grow into a big world. After a moment of reminiscence, a deep sense of helplessness arose from the bottom of his heart. As his cultivation realm increased, he became more and more convinced that his previous conjecture about the Earth universe was correct. Although what Luo Fan entered the Earth universe was only a clone of himself and his body was still in the untainted world, compared to the great Tianyuan world and even the untainted world, his feelings for the Earth universe were deeper. After all, he was born in the Earth universe. To him, the Earth universe was like his home. It was like home. Although at this moment, there was almost nothing in the entire Earth universe that he was familiar with as a mortal, home was home. Regarding this place, his feelings were still different from other places. Under such circumstances, how could he not feel helpless when he found out that the Earth's universe had such a good foundation to survive the great tribulation of heaven and earth, and yet the world had become so broken for some reason? This helpless thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind from time to time, but he did not say it out loud. These feelings were not something he could share with Taoist priest Heavenly Fire at the moment. Time gradually passed as Taoist Skyfire explained to Luo Fan the general knowledge and history of Earth and the universe. After who knew how long, Taoist Heaven Fire suddenly stopped talking to Luo Fan. He said, "Another fellow Taoist has arrived. Fellow Taoist, please wait for a moment and bring me to welcome him." Luo Fan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, just go ahead." Taoist Skyfire smiled apologetically, turned around, and disappeared in front of Luo Fan. At the same time, Luo Fan could faintly feel two auras pass through the dimensional realm and appear within it. One of the auras was very familiar to Luo Fan. It was the aura of Taoist Skyfire's incarnation, who had brought him across countless light years to the star. As for the other aura, it contained a perfect ice frost intent. It was also a connate grand Luo existence, and its strength and cultivation seemed to be a little stronger than Luo Fan's incarnation. However, it was only a little. If they were to fight, Luo Fan had absolute confidence that he could suppress Luo Fan's incarnation. Luo Fan's incarnation cultivated the legacy of the Herculean Tao Lord. Just by relying on the legacy alone, it could compare to a sixth-level immortal in the great heaven primordial world. Coupled with its cultivation realm, it was not a gap that could be closed even if it was just a little stronger than Luo Fan. Suddenly, Luo Fan had a thought, and a faint smile appeared on his face. So it's another incarnation. It seems that those who can cultivate to the connate grand Luo in the harsh environment of the Earth cosmos are not lacking in caution. After entering the dimensional realm, the aura that seemed to be Taoist Skyfire's incarnation dissipated with a loud bang. It blended into the dimensional realm. Taoist Skyfire's aura also appeared next to that aura, as if he was saying something. After a while, Taoist Skyfire led a strong man in a tight suit over through the air and appeared on the flat ground. The strong man was 12 feet tall, and his body exuded a power that could shake everything. As he moved, the surrounding void distorted slightly, as if it could not withstand his power. When the brawny man saw Luo Fan, he was surprised at first, but when he took a closer look, he instantly became solemn. Under the guidance of Taoist priest Heaven Flame, the brawny man came to where Luo Fan was. Seeing this, Luo Fan also stood up. As the host, Taoist Skyfire naturally had to introduce him. After some introductions, Luo Fan learned that the strong man was called Martial Emperor, and that he had the highest martial arts in the universe. This time, he was invited by Taoist Skyfire's incarnation for the same reason as Luo Fan, to discuss something important. "Greetings, fellow Taoists. I see that the power around you is condensing, and it seems that you are also walking the path of martial arts. Why don't you and I have a spar?" The Martial Emperor said after exchanging pleasantries with Luo Fan. Taoist Skyfire's eyes lit up when he heard the Martial Emperor's words. "That's great. I haven't seen the Martial Emperor in action for a long time. I'll have a good look today." When Luo Fan saw Taoist Skyfire's appearance, he instantly recalled the various things that happened when he met Taoist Skyfire's incarnation, and could not help but laugh. Taoist Skyfire was clearly a battle maniac. He had not mentioned it before because it was difficult for him to. Now that the Martial Emperor had taken the initiative to ask for a spar, it was exactly what he wanted, and he naturally wanted to facilitate it. If it was possible, he might even want to join in. "I don't cultivate the path of martial arts, but the path of strength. If you want to see my martial arts cultivation, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed," Luo Fan said with a smile. Haha, fellow Taoist, don't be modest. The connection between strength and martial arts is incomparably close. If you walk the path of strength, how can your martial arts cultivation be low? Skyfire, hurry up and take out your treasure. Aren't you afraid that we'll destroy your cave dwelling? The martial emperor laughed and shouted as he pulled Luo Fan's hand. Looking at his fanatical expression, Luo Fan knew that he had to fight even if he had to. He had to fight even if he didn't want to. However, in reality, he was not against it. Just as the martial monarch had said before, the relationship between strength and martial arts was incomparably close. The cultivation of martial arts required great strength to be able to display its might, and the cultivation of strength and martial arts were also not the best, but they were still an excellent method to display their might. Therefore, when he found out that the martial emperor had the title of the supreme martial arts in the universe on Earth, he was also very tempted. He wanted to see what the supreme martial arts looked like. He also wanted to comprehend some profound martial arts principles from this martial monarch so that he could better display his strength as a clone. It'll be done soon, it'll be done soon. You can't fight here. This poor Taoist's cave dwelling can't withstand the two of you, Taoist priest Skyfire said hurriedly. As he spoke, he quickly led the martial emperor and Luo Fan to the front of a building at the side. The building was made of wood and had a Taoist charm. However, this charm added a bit of iron-blooded aura. Taoist priest Skyfire raised his hand and drew in the air. A mysterious wave instantly seeped into the building in front of him, causing the iron-blooded aura in the building to increase violently. After a while, the door of the building suddenly opened, revealing a land under the starry sky. Among so many fellow Taoists, apart from me, only a battle maniac like you would specially open up a place like this for fighting. The martial emperor looked at the land under the starry sky in front of him and looked at Taoist priest Skyfire with a sympathetic gaze. Ha ha! Taoist priest Skyfire laughed and didn't say anything. He just impatiently pulled the martial emperor and Luo Fan into the land under the starry sky. As soon as they entered, Luo Fan was slightly shocked. He found that the surrounding space was many times more stable than the outside world. Even the ground beneath them was countless times harder than the ground outside. Even the vast thousand worlds couldn't compare to it. When Luo Fan saw the strength of the space and the land, he had a direct understanding of Taoist priest Skyfire's desire for battle. If the effort and materials used to open up this battlefield were used in the outside world, I fear that the outside world would no longer be a vast thousand world. This battlefield was only 10,000 miles in radius. Compared to the outside world, it was countless times smaller. Even if the strength of the space and the land were stronger than that of the vast thousand world, the amount of effort and materials required was not something that the outside world could compare to. It could be said that the cost of a battlefield with a radius of 10,000 miles was comparable to that of a 100-dimensional world. With such a difference in costs, how could Taoist priest Skyfire not see the difference between this battlefield and the outside world? After the three of them entered, Taoist priest Skyfire closed the door behind him. They seemed to appear in the boundless universe. Aside from the specks of starlight around them, there was only the land that supported them. Although Taoist priest Skyfire was fanatical, he still noticed Luo Fan's expression and said with some regret, "What a pity. With my cultivation, I can only strengthen the battlefield to such a degree. The area is only 10,000 miles in radius. It's not easy to fight. This strength is countless times stronger than the starry sky outside. Fighting here is already countless times more comfortable than the outside world. It's hundreds of times stronger than my battlefield. What are you dissatisfied with?" the martial emperor said with a displeased expression. Hearing the martial emperor's sour words, Luo Fan finally understood what kind of existences the two in front of him were. He couldn't help but wonder if he had made a huge mistake by being dragged in. All right, Enough with the idle chatter. Let's have an appetizer. Taoist priest Skyfire laughed. Luo Fan shrugged, but didn't say anything in objection. Since he had already entered, could he return? The martial monarch was overjoyed. After warning Luo Fan to be careful, he ignored the heavenly flame and raised his hand to punch at Luo Fan. His movements seemed to be extremely simple and crude, but they contained extremely profound martial arts principles. Every single muscle in his arm vibrated, every single movement of his body, and every single movement of his body conformed to some sort of supreme principle. It drew on an infinite and powerful force, and it even caused the surrounding space to crack, densely covering an area of tens of meters. Luo Fan saw this punch. Zhang Xian's eyes lit up. In fact, the strength contained within this punch wasn't very formidable. At most, it was equivalent to the strength of someone who had just attained the innate golden immortal realm. Such strength was 1,000 times weaker than the strongest strength that Luo Fan and the martial monarch could exert at this moment. Obviously, this was only a test from the martial monarch. However, even if this punch was only a test, Luo Fan could tell that the martial monarch's cultivation in the Tao of martial arts had already reached the acme of perfection. Although it was a simple punch, it contained countless profound martial arts principles, and it contained profound might that was sufficient to allow living beings who didn't know anything about martial arts to step onto the path of martial arts. Of course, such a punch was obviously not a problem for Luo Fan. Although Luo Fan hadn't wholeheartedly cultivated martial arts, there were countless profound martial arts techniques that Pangu had created based on his memories. Mysterious martial arts could be said to be innumerable, and with his wisdom, how could he not have learned anything about martial arts after cultivating for trillions of years? It could be said that Luo Fan's current cultivation and martial attainments were absolutely profound, even if he couldn't compare to a martial monarch. Even if it couldn't compare to the martial monarch, it wouldn't be too far off. Therefore, Luo Fan didn't hesitate at all when facing this punch. He raised his hand and threw a punch as well. His punch was not the same as the martial emperor's punch. This punch seemed to move in a spiral, and there were thousands of changes happening in the air at every moment. It drew on the boundless power in the air, and collided with the martial emperor's fist. With a crack, a shocking rumble rang out. The space within a radius of several dozen feet was instantly crushed into powder by the shock waves from their punches. "Nice!" the martial monarch cried out in delight. After all, the space had been specially refined by Taoist heavenly fire to be used as a battlefield, so it was naturally impossible for irreparable damage to be inflicted so easily. As a result, after the martial monarch's cry, the powder naturally fused together and formed a flat space once again. At this moment, Luo Fan and the martial monarch were entangled with each other, and they appeared in midair several tens of kilometers away from where they were. For Luo Fan and the martial monarch, that punch just now was just a test. Therefore, even if it turned the space into powder, even if the two punches were enough to cause space within a range of several tens of thousands of kilometers to collapse, they weren't affected at all. The two of them did not change their movements at all because of the punch. They were fighting crazily in the air several dozen kilometers away from where they were, at a speed that surpassed the imagination of ordinary living beings. At that moment, they were obviously no longer fighting directly with power like before. Instead, they pushed their cultivation in the Tao of martial arts to the limit, pushing every part of their bodies to the limit. Even the slightest change in their movements contained countless unfathomable mysteries. Every bit of power they unleashed contained a technique that could shock all cultivators. The martial monarch was worthy of being the supreme existence in the Tao of martial arts. His attainments in the Tao of martial arts had already reached a level that was close to the Tao of martial arts. If any of his movements were placed in the mortal world, they would be earth-shattering treasures that could guide countless cultivators to the path of immortality. Although Luo Fan's attainments in the Tao of martial arts were profound, he still couldn't compare to the martial monarch. As a result, he gradually fell into a disadvantageous position. Fortunately, Luo Fan's will clone was a body of power. The power in his body was close to the source of power. The might that every single bit of power could unleash was much stronger than the might of a martial emperor's power. As a result, even though his attainments in the Tao of martial arts were slightly inferior and he was at a disadvantage, he did not show any signs of being defeated. He continued to fight the martial monarch. Whatever damage the martial monarch dealt to him, he would retaliate in the same way, maintaining a rough balance in the battle. Apart from that, Luo Fan continuously absorbed the essence of the martial monarch's martial arts through his battle with the martial monarch. He constantly converted the martial arts the martial monarch had displayed into his own comprehension of the usage of power. His understanding of his own strength and his own body was constantly increasing. As his understanding increased, the power he could unleash became stronger and stronger, while the amount of power he needed to unleash the same power decreased. Of course, although this rate of increase was rather quick, it did not seem too obvious on the surface due to his extremely high attainments in the Tao of martial arts. It only made the martial monarch feel that the pressure Luo Fan exerted on him was increasing bit by bit in an extremely slow manner. Daoist Skyfire was extremely excited as he watched the battle. He stared at Luo Fan and the martial monarch, doing his best to remember every single detail of their battle. As his emotions changed, specks of flames gradually appeared on his body. The flames were faintly discernible, but they caused the surrounding temperature to gradually rise. Oh, it can't be. How can there be such a coincidence? Suddenly, Daoist Skyfire cried out in great pain. Chapter 8:13. The Heavenfire Daoist suddenly sensed that another clone of his was leading another Khanate Zenith Realm cultivator across the barrier of the star and into this dimensional realm. First published just a few minutes ago, he had just welcomed a martial emperor. Now, after such a short period of time, another fellow Daoist had actually arrived. Compared to the process of waiting for his fellow Daoists to arrive for several years, this situation could not be any more coincidental than it was. Clearly, as the master of this dimensional realm and the existence who had invited his fellow Daoists here to discuss important matters, it was naturally impossible for him to continue watching the battle between Emperor Wu and Luo Fan when his fellow Daoists had arrived. This situation was simply bad news for the Heavenfire Daoist, whose desire for battle was beyond imagination. How could he not cry out in surprise? After he cried out, a look of struggle appeared on his face. After a while, he finally could not hold back his desire. With a single thought, countless flames emerged from his body, instantly condensing into a faint, slightly transparent, and somewhat illusory clone. This incarnation was far inferior to the two incarnations he had invited Luo Fan and Wu Huang to come here. Its power was so weak that it was almost like someone who had just reached the gold core realm. This kind of power was simply insignificant compared to the power of his body. Such a clone clearly had no combat strength at all. However, the Heavenfire Daoist did not condense this clone for battle. After the clone was condensed, the Heavenfire Daoist left it where it was and stared closely at the peerlessly brilliant battle between Luo Fan and Emperor Wu. Then, he turned around and gritted his teeth as he left the battlefield. Luo Fan and Wu Huang were already completely immersed in the battle. They did not care about Daoist Heavenfire leaving behind an incarnation or his real body. In their senses, there was only the other party, and only the various marvelous martial arts that the other party had displayed. Only the boundless principles that permeated the world existed. For ordinary people, the battlefield that spanned thousands of kilometers was enough for tens of millions of people to fight together, and they might not even be able to finish it. However, for two Khanate Zenith Realm cultivators like them, such a battlefield was still a little too narrow. Almost in an instant, their silhouettes almost covered the entire battlefield, causing the entire battlefield to be densely packed with their battle afterimages. In these battle afterimages, every posture, every movement, and every body shape contained the profound principles of martial arts. It contained the profound mysteries of martial arts that could allow all living beings to achieve the supreme path of immortality. The instant these afterimages appeared, the entire battlefield turned from an empty battlefield into a holy land of martial arts. It was enough to drive all living beings interested in martial arts crazy. Luo Fan had fallen into a mysterious state at this time. In his mind, countless martial arts were continuously created by him. Then, he surpassed them in an instant and integrated them into his body. His martial arts attainments continued to rise throughout the entire process. Every time he made a move, it became more and more subtle and mysterious. Every time he attacked, the power of his attacks became stronger and stronger. Luo Fan had undergone such changes, but the martial emperor had also undergone many changes. However, the martial emperor's cultivation in martial arts had reached an unimaginable height. Luo Fan could also feel that his martial arts attainments were constantly rising. However, the martial emperor only felt that his thoughts were becoming clearer and that his power was becoming smoother and smoother. Every time he attacked, he felt more and more comfortable. However, there were not many changes in his martial arts attainment. As someone who was regarded as the supreme existence in martial arts by the entire universe on Earth, how could the martial emperor not know the changes that were happening to Luo Fan? How could he not know that Luo Fan was currently working hard to absorb the principles of martial arts from him and improve his martial arts attainment? However, he had no intention of stopping them. On the contrary, it was the exact opposite. On the contrary, he was extremely excited about this. He even displayed the countless martial arts that he had comprehended over the years. He continuously performed martial arts that he had never displayed before so that Luo Fan could better absorb the principles of martial arts, so that Luo Fan could improve his martial arts attainments faster. The reason for this was none other than the martial emperor himself. As the supreme existence in the entire universe on Earth, he felt lonely. It was an achievement to be regarded as the supreme existence in the universe on Earth. But didn't this mean that martial arts were not valued by many cultivators in this universe? If martial arts were really prosperous and valued by all cultivators, how could he be regarded as the supreme existence in martial arts with his cultivation realm of the innate Great Luo realm? One must know that although his cultivation realm was considered to be at the top among the many cultivators on Earth, he was definitely not at the peak. For example, the legendary Longzuan could kill him instantly with a glance. There were many powerful existences like the Longzuan in the universe on Earth, and there were even more existences that were weaker than the Longzuan. Under such circumstances, one could imagine the status of martial arts in the universe on Earth. It was precisely because of this that a martial emperor who condensed an innate golden core from cultivating martial arts and became an innate great Luo by condensing his strength into martial arts through martial arts could be said to be the only one in the universe on Earth. One could imagine how lonely he was. With that, Luo Fan, who was a connate Grand Luo, had such an interest in martial arts. Although Luo Fan did not cultivate the Tao of martial arts but the Tao of strength, Luo Fan could not help but feel as if he had met a bosom friend. Naturally, he welcomed the fact that Luo Fan had absorbed the principles of martial arts from him. As for whether Luo Fan would surpass him after absorbing the principles of martial arts, he was not worried at all. As a martial emperor and an innate great Luo realm being, he had supreme confidence in himself. He firmly believed that his strength did not come from his martial arts, but from himself, his spirit, his will, and his quality. If the principles of martial arts were absorbed by others, it would definitely not affect his strength. It was even more impossible for someone who was inferior to him to become stronger than him. With how sharp Luo Fan's senses were, when the martial emperor's response changed, he instantly noticed what the martial emperor was thinking. For a moment, he felt a little grateful. To Luo Fan, the importance of martial arts was only average. It was just a method for him to unleash his strength. It would naturally be good if he could cultivate it to the acme of perfection. Even if he could not, he had other methods to make up for such a loss. However, even if the importance of martial arts was average, the martial emperor's actions were a sign of goodwill to him. It meant that the martial emperor intended to help him, so how could he not appreciate it? After the heavenly fire Taoist left for a while, the door to the battlefield opened again. Then, the heavenly fire Taoist led a woman in. The woman was also a clone. Judging from the aura and the power contained within the clone, she had only just become an innate great Luo. It seemed like the woman's cultivation was slightly weaker than Luo Fan and the martial emperor. However, since she was an innate great Luo, since she was invited here by the heavenly fire Taoist, it meant that the woman was definitely not simple. During the process of cultivation, any cultivator's body would become more and more perfect as they were constantly tempered and improved. As such, it was almost impossible to find an ugly cultivator in the world of cultivation. Even if there were cultivators who did not seem to fit the aesthetic standards of ordinary people, if one took a closer look, one would also notice the various charms that made people feel good about them. Female cultivators were clearly more concerned about their appearance. As such, female cultivators in the world of cultivation were usually unimaginably beautiful. However, the woman who was lured here by the heavenly fire Taoist had broken this common sense. This woman's figure was quite beautiful, but her appearance was not flattering. It was not that she was ugly, but the woman's face was engraved with countless runes. Each of the runes was as small as a speck of dust. They were densely packed, and they were arranged on her face in an incredibly profound and complicated manner. It was as if a large patch of pitch-black spots had covered her face. No, it was not just her face. These tiny, dust-like runic roots not only covered his face, but they also extended downwards and covered his entire body. Her entire body was covered in countless black spots. Each of the huge number of runes contained various indescribable mysteries. When combined together, they formed an incredibly profound whole, making the woman's figure faintly discernible. It was as if she was communicating with time and space at all times. Vaguely, she seemed to be outside of time and space. It was as if she existed in the past, present, and future at the same time. The woman's expression was so calm that it was almost cold. As she stood there, she naturally gave off a transcendent aura. It was as if nothing in the world, including the living beings in the universe, could make her move at all. You've already met the martial emperor, so there's no need for introductions. Look at the fellow who's fighting the martial emperor. His name is Luo Fan, and he cultivates the path of strength. His abilities are extremely powerful, and even I'm not a match for him. Taoist Heavenly Fire introduced him to the woman with a chuckle. As he spoke, his eyes locked onto Luo Fan and the martial emperor, as if he was trying to engrave the scene of their battle deep in his memory, so that he would never forget it for the rest of his life. Fellow Luo Fan is only on par with you, the woman said indifferently. Hee. Taoist Heavenly Fire chuckled, but did not reply. He had known the woman for hundreds of millions of years, so how could he not know what kind of person she was? If he were to argue with her for not giving him any face, he would not be able to cultivate any more. If he were to argue, he would waste all his time on that, and he would never have the time to cultivate again. Fellow Luo Fan's potential is greater than yours. Unlike you, I can't even see a trace of his future. A strange light flashed through the woman's eyes. As a space-time traveler, you're actually unable to see a person's future? Didn't you predict that I would face a certain tribulation in a few hundred years the moment you saw me? When he heard the woman's words, Taoist Heavenly Fire finally shifted his gaze away from Luo Fan and the martial emperor, and turned to look at the woman in surprise. That's why I said your potential is inferior to his. The more powerful a cultivator's future is, the more difficult it is to see his future. Fellow Luo fan is the cultivator whose future is the most difficult to see I've ever seen in my life. Perhaps his accomplishments in the future will be incomparably shocking. The strange light in the woman's eyes gradually faded, and a rare change finally appeared on her face. She sighed with emotion. Incomparably shocking accomplishments. Looks like I've invited a very impressive cultivator this time. Taoist Heavenly Fire chuckled. Taoist Heavenly Fire and the woman didn't disguise their conversation, but they weren't shouting or yelling either. Luo Fan and the Martial Emperor were wholeheartedly focused on each other and fighting each other. They didn't pay attention to anyone else, so they didn't notice their conversation at all. As a result, Luo Fan didn't know that the space-time traveler actually thought so highly of him. But even if he knew, he didn't care. After all, he had absolute confidence in himself. He believed that his future would never be shackled to the immortal realm, and that he would definitely be able to prove his origin Tao fruit and traverse the three perfect worlds. He would comprehend the cultivation civilizations of the three great worlds and cultivate the most powerful legacies of the three perfect worlds. If he still couldn't prove his origin Tao fruit, then he would definitely doubt its existence. As his battle with the Martial Emperor progressed, Luo Fan felt his will gradually change in some way, and the power within him was subtly adjusting as well. Luo Fan cultivated the legacy of Tao Sovereign of Strength, and the power within him was a power that was close to the origin of all power. A power like that, it could be said that it was almost omnipotent. It could evolve into almost any substance that living beings could think of, and it could evolve into almost any power. Of course, when the word almost was removed, it would be the moment when the power truly became the origin of all power. Because of the characteristics of this power, Luo Fan was able to give it new characteristics at any time and place. He was able to fuse many of the characteristics of power that he had never obtained before into it, constantly making it approach the origin of all power. At that very moment, during his battle with the Martial Emperor, Luo Fan gradually sensed that there was a strange power entrenched in the Martial Emperor's body. That power was different from any power he had seen before. It was an unimaginable power that had been condensed from supreme will. This power was able to trigger a reaction from the power within him, causing it to gradually gain a quality that it had never possessed before. This quality made it easier and easier for him to use martial arts. It made his comprehension of martial arts faster and faster, and the growth of his attainments in martial arts became more and more astonishing. After an unknown amount of time, after exchanging countless attacks with the Martial Emperor, Luo Fan's mind suddenly jolted. It was as if a bolt of lightning had flashed through his mind. He instantly understood the power he had sensed from the Martial Emperor. Just what kind of power was the quality that the power within his body had gradually gained? It was martial power. It was a product condensed from the ultimate will of martial arts. It was a power that did not exist in the natural world, and could only be found in living beings. After understanding this, Luo Fan was overjoyed. In that instant, he created what he had comprehended for who knew how many years. In this battle, the martial arts he had absorbed from the martial monarch's body were constantly being refined in his mind, continuously refining the true meaning of martial contained within. Then, he crazily poured it into the power in his body that was akin to the source of power. The true meaning of martial arts was a mysterious existence that was invisible and intangible. If such an existence were to be placed in the hands of a cultivator who had completely immersed himself in martial arts, it would be enough to become the foundation of a martial arts worldview when extended. However, in the view of Luo Fan, in the view of Tao Master of Strength's worldview, it was only the quality of martial power. It was only a certain form of martial power. Therefore, in the process of continuously pouring the true meaning of martial arts into the power within his body, the power within his body gradually transformed, and gradually became a kind of martial power that the martial emperor relied on to become a connate Grand Luo. This change instantly caused the aura that Luo Fan emitted to undergo some mysterious change. For ordinary cultivators, this change might be a very normal change. At most, they would think that it was a change in the method that Luo Fan used. However, for the martial emperor, this change brought him an unimaginable shock. This is martial. This is the aura of martial arts. Why does fellow Luo Fan have the aura of martial arts on him? At this moment, this was the only thought that appeared in the martial emperor's mind. With this thought, his body retreated slightly, and he instantly left the range of the martial arts that Luo Fan used. He directly left the battlefield. Of course, this was not a complete escape. If Luo Fan wanted to, he could easily chase after him and pull him back into the battle again. However, Luo Fan would not do this. After all, it was not a battle of life and death between him and the martial emperor. It was just a spar. The martial emperor's attitude had already indicated that he did not intend to continue the spar. How could he be so tactless and continue to chase after him? Moreover, at this moment, he had something more important to do than the spar with the martial emperor. It was to refine the true meaning of martial arts contained in the martial arts that he knew and integrate it into the power within his body, so that he could truly grasp a completely new kind of power, martial power. He faintly had a feeling that as long as he grasped martial power, the inheritance of the great strength Tao Lord that he cultivated would definitely be able to rise because of this. It would surpass the state when he had just broken through the barrier between immortal realm and mortal realm, and reached the second rank of immortal realm. In this way, perhaps the power of the divine ability that he cultivated from the inheritance of the great strength Tao Lord would be comparable to the peak of the 9th rank of immortal realm, which was close to the level of connate Grand Luo. At that time, coupled with the power of his will clone, the power that he could exert would definitely be even more powerful and shocking.